Hello, my dear adventurers. If you like the story, please subscribe. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we journey to old Japan, to a time when the mountains held secrets and the forests whispered with voices not quite human. We find ourselves at a small inn high in the peaks, where travelers gather around a warm hearth while winter rages outside. And on this particular night, when the snow falls thick and the wind howls like hungry ghosts, stories will be shared. Stories of yokai, the spirits and creatures that walk between our world and theirs. So settle in, pour yourself some warm tea, and let us begin. The snow had been falling since mid-morning, soft at first, then with increasing purpose. By the time the afternoon light began to fade, the mountained pass was buried under a blanket of white that seemed to have no end. The old inn called the Crane's Rest stood at the crossing of two paths, one leading down to the valley villages, the other winding higher into the peaks where only monks and hermits dared to live. It was a sturdy building built generations ago from dark wood and stone, with a steep roof designed to shed the heavy snows that came each winter. Smoke rose from its chimney in a steady grey column, and warm light glowed behind paper screens, promising shelter and safety from the storm. Inside, the inn was exactly what a weary traveler might dream of on such a night. The main room was spacious but somehow still felt cozy, with low beams across the ceiling and tatami mats covering the floor. A large hearth dominated one wall, and in it burned a cheerful fire that crackled and popped, sending dancing shadows across the walls. The air smelled of wood smoke, cooking rice, and something savory simmering in a pot. Paper lanterns hung from hooks, their soft light adding to the warmth of the fire. The innkeeper was a woman named Otsuru, and she had seen perhaps 70 winters, though her movements were still quick and sure. Her hair was white as the snow outside, pulled back in a simple style, and her face was deeply lined in the way that comes from a lifetime of smiling. She wore a dark blue kimono with a pattern of white cranes, fitting for her inn's name, and over this a working apron that had seen many years of service. Her hands were never still, always tending to something, adjusting a cushion, stirring the pot, adding wood to the fire. By late afternoon, 5 travelers had arrived at the Crane's Rest, each seeking shelter from the gathering storm. They sat now around the hearth, grateful for the warmth and the promise of a hot meal. The snow outside had gone from gentle falling to a full blizzard, the kind that could last for days and make the mountain paths impassable. The first to arrive had been Takeshi, a merchant of middle years with a round, pleasant face and quick eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. He traveled the mountain roads regularly, carrying goods between the valley towns and the remote villages, and he knew the Crane's Rest well. His pack sat beside him, carefully wrapped bundles of cloth and small luxuries that mountain folk rarely saw. He wore a sturdy traveling kimono of brown and gray, practical for the road, and his hands were calloused from years of carrying loads. Next had come Yuki, a young woman of perhaps 20, dressed in the white and red robes of a shrine maiden. Her name meant snow, which seemed fitting on a night like this. She carried herself with a quiet grace, and her eyes held a depth unusual for someone so young, as though she had seen things that aged the soul, if not the body. A small pack rested at her side, containing her few possessions and sacred items from her shrine. She had been traveling to a sister shrine in the high mountains when the storm caught her. The third traveler was Hiroshi, a Buddhist monk so old that even Otsuru looked young beside him. His head was shaved, and he wore the simple grey robes of his order, much patched and mended. He carried a wooden staff worn smooth by decades of walking mountain paths, and prayer beads hung from his belt. Despite his age, his back was straight, and his eyes were sharp and clear. He had spent most of his life in mountain temples studying and meditating, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who understood how to preserve energy for the long journey. The fourth was Kenji, a ronin, a masterless samurai, perhaps 30 years old, with the weathered look of someone who had seen too much of life's harder edges. He still carried his swords, though his kimono was worn and his sandals patched. There was a sadness about him, a weight he carried in his shoulders, but also a quiet dignity. He sat slightly apart from the others, though not unfriendly, simply maintaining the distance of someone used to traveling alone. The last to arrive, stumbling in just as the storm reached its full fury, had been a young man barely old enough to be called such, perhaps 16 or 17. His name was Sato, and he was an apprentice to a woodcarver in one of the valley villages, traveling to deliver a commissioned piece to a temple. The storm had caught him completely by surprise, and he had nearly lost his way in the white blindness of the blizzard. He sat now closest to the fire, still shivering slightly despite the warmth. His fingers wrapped around a cup of hot tea that Otsuru had pressed into his hands the moment he arrived. Otsuru moved between them with practiced ease, setting out small tables, bringing cups and a pot of tea, checking that everyone was comfortable. The tea was simple but good, green and slightly bitter, perfect for cutting through the cold that seemed to cling to bones, even inside the warm room. "Ah, you were wise to stop when you did," Otsuru said to Sato, refilling his cup. "Another hour, and you might have wandered right off the path. The mountain has no mercy for the lost, especially on nights like this." "I thought I could make it to the next village before dark," Sato said, his voice still shaky. "I did not realize how quickly the storm would come." "The mountains teach humility," Hiroshi the monk said, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "We think we can master them, plan around them, but they remind us that we are small, and they are vast." "Well spoken," Takeshi the merchant agreed. "I have been traveling these roads for 20 years, and I still respect the weather. When the snow comes, you find shelter, simple as that." Kenji the Ronin said nothing, but he nodded slightly, his eyes on the fire. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the inn and rattling the screens. The snow fell so thick now that when Otsuru went to check the entrance, sliding open the door just a crack, all they could see was a wall of white. She closed it quickly, securing it against the storm. "We will be here until morning at least," she said, returning to the hearth. perhaps longer if the storm continues, but do not worry. I have plenty of rice, vegetables, and even some fish I smoked last autumn. We will not go hungry." She settled herself by the hearth and began preparing the evening meal with practiced movements. From a large ceramic jar, she scooped rice into a pot, added water, and set it to cook at the edge of the fire. From another container came dried vegetables that she rehydrated in warm water, and from a hook on the wall she took down several strips of smoked fish, dark and fragrant. The travelers watched in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. There was something deeply peaceful about being safe and warm while the storm raged outside, something primal that touched an ancient part of the human soul. The firelight flickered, the rice pot began to steam, and gradually the inn filled with the smell of cooking food. Yuki the Shrine Maiden was the first to speak into the comfortable quiet. "Otsuru-san, you have kept this inn for many years, have you not?" "I have," Otsuru replied, stirring the vegetables. "My husband and I opened the Crane's Rest 50 years ago when we were newly married. He passed into the next world 10 years past, but I have kept it running. The road needs its resting places, and I am not yet ready to leave this life." 50 years, Takeshi said with appreciation. "You must have seen countless travelers, heard countless stories." "Oh, more than I could count," Otsuru agreed, and there was a gleam in her eye. "The road brings all kinds. Merchants like yourself, holy people like Yuki-san and Hiroshi-san, warriors like Kenji-san, and young apprentices like Sato-kun, each with their own path, their own purpose, their own tales to tell. And on nights like this," Hiroshi said slowly, "when the storm keeps us inside and the darkness comes early, what better way to pass the time than with stories?" Otsuru smiled, a knowing expression that made her wrinkled face somehow ageless. "Indeed, though I should warn you, on nights like this, when the wind howls and the snow falls thick, the boundary between our world and the other world grows thin. The yokai walk more freely. The spirits are restless." At the word yokai, young Sato looked up sharply, his eyes widening slightly. "Yokai? You mean the supernatural creatures, the ghosts and demons?" "Not all yokai are demons," Yuki said gently. "Many are simply spirits, beings that exist alongside us, sometimes helpful, sometimes mischievous, sometimes dangerous, but not necessarily evil." "The Shrine Maiden speaks truth," Hiroshi added. "In my years in the mountains, I have encountered many strange things. The world is far larger and stranger than most people realize." Kenji finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying weight. "I have seen things that cannot be explained by any reasonable means. Things that should not exist, yet do." Takeshi leaned forward, his merchant's curiosity piqued. "As have I, though I confess I am a practical man. Still, there are experiences that even practicality cannot dismiss." Otsuru ladled rice into wooden bowls, added the rehydrated vegetables and pieces of smoked fish, and began passing the bowls to her guests. The food was simple, but well prepared, and deeply satisfying after a long day of cold travel. For several minutes there was silence as everyone ate, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. When the meal was finished, and Otsuru had poured more tea for everyone. She settled herself more comfortably by the hearth and looked around at the gathered faces, each lit by the warm glow of the fire. On nights like this, she began, her voice taking on the tone of a storyteller, when we are safe inside, but the storm rages without, when the darkness presses close and the familiar world seems far away, this is when the old stories come alive. This is when we remember that Japan is not just a land of rice fields and mountains, of temples and shrines, but also a land of mysteries, of yokai and spirits, of magic and wonder, of things that walk in the spaces between the seen and unseen. The wind chose that moment to howl particularly loudly, as if in agreement, and the fire flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Young Sato pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders, though the room was warm. My grandmother used to tell me stories of yokai, he said quietly. She said they were all around us, invisible most of the time, but always watching. Your grandmother was wise, Otsuru said. They are indeed all around us. In the forests and rivers, in the old houses and forgotten shrines, even here, in the mountains during a snowstorm. Some are ancient, as old as the land itself. Others are newer, born from human emotions and actions. Some are benevolent, some are neutral, and yes, some are dangerous. I have always wondered, Takeshi said, why we tell these stories. Are they simply tales to frighten children and entertain adults? Or is there something more to them? Hiroshi set down his teacup thoughtfully. Stories are how we make sense of the world, how we pass down wisdom, how we remember what is important. Yokai stories teach us to respect nature, to be cautious in unfamiliar places, to treat all beings with consideration. They remind us that we do not fully understand everything, that mystery and wonder still exist. They also, Yuki added softly, teach us about ourselves. Many yokai are reflections of human nature, our fears and desires, our capacity for both good and evil. When we hear stories of kitsune fox spirits tricking the greedy, or kappa water demons challenging the prideful, we are really hearing stories about human flaws and virtues. Kenji had been quiet, but now he spoke, his eyes distant. And some stories are simply true. I have walked paths where the supernatural is as real as the ground beneath your feet. I have seen things I cannot explain, things that changed me. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, but inside the crane's rest the fire burned warm, and the gathered travelers sat in a circle of light and safety. Otsuru looked at each of them in turn, and her smile was both kind and knowing. Then perhaps, she said, on this night when the storm keeps us together, when we have warm food in our bellies and time to spare, we should share our stories. Each of you has walked many roads, seen many things. I suspect each of you carries a tale worth telling. I would very much like to hear such stories, Sato said eagerly, his earlier fear forgotten in curiosity. As would I, Yuki agreed. Takeshi laughed, a warm sound. Well, I am a merchant. I have stories aplenty. though whether they are worth telling is for others to judge. All stories are worth telling, Otsuru said firmly, if they are told with honesty and listened to with open hearts. Hiroshi nodded his agreement, and even Kenji, silent and reserved, inclined his head slightly. The fire crackled, sending up a shower of sparks that danced like tiny spirits before disappearing up the chimney. The paper lanterns swayed slightly in an unfelt breeze, their light warm and steady. Outside, the world was white and howling, but inside the Crane's Rest there was warmth and companionship and the promise of stories to come. Otsuru refilled the teacups one more time, then settled back with her own cup cradled in her weathered hands. Very well then, she said. Who will begin? Who will be the first to open the door between our world and the world of mystery? The travelers looked at each other, and it was Takeshi who cleared his throat and shifted forward slightly, his round face serious in the firelight. I will start, he said. If you will hear me, I have a tale from 5 years past, when I was traveling the western roads and encountered something I have never forgotten. Something that taught me that not all bargains are what they seem, and that the yokai, particularly the fox spirits, are far cleverer than any human. Aga, the kitsune, Yuki breathed, and there was both respect and wariness in her voice. Yes, Takeshi said, the kitsune, and this is what happened to me. The others settled in, drawing closer to the fire, and outside the storm howled on, but inside the Crane's Rest the first story of the night was about to begin. Takeshi took a moment to gather his thoughts, his hands wrapped around his teacup. The firelight played across his face, making his expression seem to shift between thoughtful and troubled. 5 years ago, he began, I was traveling through the western provinces, carrying silk and lacquerware to sell in the mountain villages. It was autumn, and the forests were beautiful beyond words. Every tree blazed with color, red and gold and orange, like the whole world was on fire, but in the most glorious way. The paths were carpeted with fallen leaves that rustled underfoot, and the air had that particular crispness that makes you feel alive and aware. I was perhaps 2 days from any village, following an old path through dense forest. I knew the route well enough, or so I thought, but as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice something strange. The path seemed to twist more than I remembered. Trees that I could have sworn were on my left appeared on my right. The sun, which should have been lowering in the west, seemed to dance around the sky in ways that made no sense. By the time I admitted to myself that I was lost, the sun was setting, and the forest was filling with shadows. Now, I am not a superstitious man by nature. Numbers and trade, these I understand. But even a practical person knows that being alone in an unfamiliar forest at night is not wise. The old stories come back to you, the warnings your grandmother whispered when you were small. I was searching for somewhere to make camp, somewhere with clear ground and a view of the stars so I could orient myself in the morning, when I saw a light ahead, through the trees. Not the harsh light of a fire, but something softer, like moonlight, except the moon had not yet risen. My first thought was that I had found a village, or at least a woodcutter's hut. I hurried forward, grateful and relieved. But when I pushed through the last curtain of branches, what I found was not a village. It was a shrine, small and old, tucked into a clearing where the trees formed a natural circle. The shrine was simple, just a small structure with a peaked roof and a torii gate marking the entrance to the sacred space. Stone lanterns flanked the path, though no candles burned in them. Yet somehow the whole clearing was filled with that strange silvery light. And standing before the shrine, with her back to me, was a woman. Takeshi paused, taking a sip of his tea, and the listeners leaned forward unconsciously. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, he continued quietly. She wore a kimono of deep red silk, patterned with autumn leaves and golden foxes. Her hair was long and black, falling down her back like a waterfall of ink. When she turned to look at me, her face was perfect, delicate and pale like porcelain, with dark eyes that seemed to hold all the mysteries of the forest. "You are lost, merchant," she said, and her voice was like wind chimes, musical and clear. It was not a question. "I am," I admitted, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "I seem to have wandered from the path." "Wandered?" she repeated, and there was amusement in her tone. "Or were you led?" She smiled then, and I saw that her smile was knowing and ancient, far older than her youthful face suggested. It was then that I noticed her shadow. The moon had finally risen full and bright, and it cast shadows across the clearing. My shadow stretched out behind me, as shadows do, but her shadow was wrong. Where her shadow should have been the shape of a woman, instead I saw the silhouette of a fox, a large fox with multiple tails that swayed gently, even though she stood perfectly still. I felt my blood turn cold. I knew then what I was dealing with. A kitsune, a fox spirit, one of the most powerful and clever of all yokai. They can take human form, they can create illusions, they can trick and deceive with ease. Some are benevolent, serving the god Inari as messengers. Others are more mischievous, or even malevolent, toying with humans for their own amusement or darker purposes. The woman, the kitsune, saw that I had noticed her shadow. Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed a bit too white, a bit too sharp. "Ah, you are clever for a human," she said. "Most do not notice until it is too late. This pleases me. I grow bored of fools. What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My grandmother had told me once that the most important thing when dealing with yokai was to show respect, but not fear. To be honest, but careful with your words. "Ah, want?" She laughed, a sound like bells. "What makes you think I want anything? Perhaps I am simply enjoying the moonlight at this forgotten shrine. Perhaps you are the one who has intruded on me." "Forgive me," I said, bowing. "I meant no disrespect. I am simply a lost traveler seeking shelter for the night." She circled me slowly, and I could see her examining me with those dark, ancient eyes. When she spoke again, her tone was more serious. "I will offer you a bargain, merchant. It is what your kind understands best, yes? Or bargains and trades? What sort of bargain? I asked cautiously. I can give you something precious, she said. Something that will change your fortune forever. Wealth beyond your current dreams. Every trade you make will profit. Every investment will grow. Every door will open before you. You will become the most successful merchant in the western provinces within a year. I will admit my heart leapt at these words. What merchant does not dream of such success? But I have not traveled the roads for 20 years without a learning caution. And what would you want in return? I asked. The kitsune's smile turned sly. Only something small, something you will hardly miss. I want your shadow. My shadow? I repeated, not understanding. Yes, that dark companion that follows you in sunlight, that stretches before you at dawn and behind you at dusk. Your shadow? I collect them, you see. I find them amusing, and you would hardly notice its absence. Most humans never look at their shadows anyway. Now I may be a merchant, but I am not a fool. I know the old stories. Your shadow is more than just an absence of light. It is tied to your soul, to your existence in the world. To lose your shadow is to lose a part of yourself, to become something less than fully human. People without shadows are noticed, marked as different, touched by the supernatural. They are shunned and feared. That is not a small thing, I said carefully. That is a great thing, perhaps the greatest thing. My shadow is part of me. The kitsune waved a hand dismissively. Humans always overvalue what they possess. Your shadow does nothing for you. It does not keep you warm, does not feed you, does not count your coins. It simply follows you about, a useless appendage. If it is so useless, I countered, why do you want it? She laughed again, delighted. Oh, you are clever, very well. I will be honest with you, merchant, because honesty has its own power in bargains. I want your shadow because it is a piece of your essence, your spirit. With it, I could influence your dreams, know your thoughts, even command you if I wished. It would make you mine in ways you cannot imagine. Her honesty was more frightening than any lie would have been. I took a step back, my hand instinctively moving to the small charm I wore at my belt, a protective talisman my mother had given me. I cannot accept your bargain, I said firmly. The kitsune's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been approval. Cannot, or will not? Both, I said. The price is too high for any amount of gold. We stood there in the moonlit clearing regarding each other. The forest around us was utterly silent, as though every creature held its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Finally, the kitsune spoke. What if I modified the bargain? What if I offered you success for 1 year, and in return you give me something less precious than your shadow? What would you want instead? I asked warily. A memory, she said. One memory of your choosing. Something you have held on to. Something that brings you either joy or pain. Give me that, and I will give you 1 year of prosperity. I thought carefully. A memory. Which one could I part with? I have many, both good and bad. My first successful trade, the day my father died, my wedding day to my late wife, the birth of my daughter. Then I realized the trap. Any memory precious enough to interest a kitsune was too precious to lose, and any memory painful enough to want to lose was painful for a reason, was part of what made me who I was. To give up either joy or pain was to give up part of my humanity. Ah, no, I said, I will not trade my memories either. They are what make me myself, what give my life meaning. Without them, what would prosperity matter? The kitsune studied me for a long moment, and then to my surprise she smiled. But this smile was different, warmer, more genuine. "Oh, you are wise for a human," she said. "Wiser than most of your kind. So many come to this clearing, see me, and agree to my first offer without question, too blinded by greed to think of consequences. And those who refuse the first offer always accept the second, eager to believe they have won a better bargain." "Then what happens to them?" I asked. "They get exactly what they bargained for," she said. "Wealth, success, prosperity. But without their shadow or without their precious memories, they find that none of it brings happiness. They grow hollow, empty. They realize too late that they traded the most important things for things that matter least." "Aha! Why?" I asked. "Why make such bargains if you know they will bring suffering?" The kitsune's expression became serious, almost sad. "Because humans need to learn. Your kind are so quick to want, so eager to have, so desperate to succeed. You forget what truly matters. My bargains are lessons, though harsh ones. Those who have the wisdom to refuse, like you, learn without paying the price. Those who accept learn through suffering. Either way, they learn." She turned away from me then, facing the small shrine, and in the moonlight I saw her form shimmer and shift. For just a moment I saw her true form, a magnificent fox with fur like a burnished copper, and not 2 or 3 but 9 tails, the mark of an ancient and powerful kitsune. Then she was a woman again, though somehow less solid, more spirit than flesh. "You may stay here tonight," she said without turning. "The shrine will shelter you. In the morning follow the rising sun. You will find your path again. And merchant, remember this night. Remember that the greatest wealth is what cannot be bought or sold." I bowed deeply, though she was not looking. "Thank you. I will remember." When I straightened, she was gone. The silvery light faded, leaving only ordinary moonlight. The clearing was just a clearing, the shrine just an old, weathered structure. I half wondered if I had dreamed it all, but my heart was still pounding, and I could see in the dust before the shrine the paw prints of a large fox leading away into the forest. I did stay the night, huddled against the shrine, barely sleeping. When dawn came, I followed the sun eastward, and within an hour I found the main path again. I reached the next village by midday, and my trade there was good, as it always had been. Not magical, not extraordinary, just the honest profit of fair dealing. "Ah, but the strange thing is," Takeshi said, leaning forward, his voice dropping, "from that day to this, my business has been steady and reliable. Not wildly successful, not making me rich beyond measure, but good, honest, enough. And whenever I make a difficult decision, whenever I am tempted by a bargain that seems too good to be true, I remember the kitsune and her offer. I remember the weight of my shadow on the ground behind me and the precious burden of my memories, both joyful and sad, and I choose wisely." He sat back, his story finished, and took a sip of his now cool tea. The room was quiet for a moment, everyone absorbing the tale. Finally, Yuki spoke. "You were very fortunate," she said softly. "Most kitsune do not show such mercy, such willingness to teach rather than simply trick. Perhaps she was a servant of Inari," Hiroshi suggested. "The gods' messengers sometimes test humans to see if they are worthy of blessings." "Or perhaps," Kenji said quietly, "she was simply old enough to have grown tired of cruelty and found more satisfaction in wisdom." Otsuru was nodding, a knowing look on her weathered face. "Whatever her reasons, she gave you a great gift, Takeshi-san. Not wealth, but wisdom. That is the greater treasure." Young Sato had been listening with wide eyes. But what if someone really needed help? What if they were desperate? Would it be so wrong to accept such a bargain? Takeshi looked at the young man with compassion. "Desperation makes us vulnerable, makes us willing to pay prices we should not pay. The kitsune know this. They feed on desperation, but the truth is, Sato-kun, the things we most desperately want are rarely the things we truly need, and the cost of obtaining them through such means is always higher than we imagine." "Well spoken," Hiroshi said. "Attachment to outcomes, desperate clinging to what we want. This is the source of suffering. The Buddha taught this, and your kitsune demonstrated it in her own way." Outside, the wind rattled the screens, reminding them all of the storm that still raged. But inside, warmed by the fire and the shared story, the travelers felt safe and contemplative. Otsuru rose to add more wood to the fire, and as the flames grew brighter, she looked at Yuki. "And you, Shrine Maiden, you mentioned that your name means snow, and on this night of snow surely you have a tale to tell." Yuki had been gazing into the fire, her expression distant. Now she looked up, and there was something ancient in her young eyes, something that spoke of inheritance and legacy. I do," she said quietly. "It is a story my grandfather told me many times before he died. It is why I chose to serve at the shrine, why I took the vows I took. It is the story of the Yuki Onna, the Snow Woman, and the mercy she showed to a young man who would become my grandfather." The others settled in to listen, and as Yuki began to speak, her voice took on the cadence of a sacred tale, passed down through generations, worn smooth by countless tellings, but no less powerful for that. "My grandfather's name was Taro," Yuki began, her voice soft but clear. He was 16 when this happened, the same age as Sato here, and like Sato, he was an apprentice. But he apprenticed to a charcoal maker in a village at the base of these very mountains. It was the depth of winter, 60 years ago, when the snows came early and heavy, burying the world in white silence. Taro and his master had gone into the mountains to check on the charcoal kilns they maintained in a small hut deep in the forest. These kilns could not be left unattended for long, as the slow burning of the wood into charcoal required constant care. They had planned to return before nightfall, but a storm came up suddenly, as mountain storms do. turning the world into a whirling blindness of white. They became separated. One moment his master was ahead of him on the path. The next, Taro was alone in a world of snow and wind, unable to see more than a few paces in any direction. He called out, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. He tried to retrace his steps, but the snow had already covered their tracks, and every direction looked the same. Fear gripped him then. He was young, and though he knew the mountains, he knew them in fair weather. In a blizzard, even familiar paths became death traps. He could wander in circles until he collapsed from exhaustion and cold. He could fall into a ravine or off a cliff, invisible in the white chaos. He could freeze to death within sight of shelter and never know it. So he did the only thing he could do. He found a tree, a great old pine with thick branches that provided some shelter from the wind, and he huddled against its trunk, wrapping his cloak tight around himself. He knew his chances were poor, but at least he would not die wandering. At least his body might be found when the storm passed. The cold was terrible. It crept through his cloak, through his clothes, into his very bones. His fingers and toes went numb first, then his legs, then his arms. His breathing became shallow, and he felt a strange, dangerous warmth beginning to spread through him. He knew this was the final trap of freezing, the illusion of heat that came before death. His eyes grew heavy, and he felt himself beginning to drift into a sleep from which he would not wake. That was when he saw her. Through the curtain of falling snow, a figure approached. At first he thought it was his imagination, a dream brought on by his dying mind. But the figure grew more solid, more real, until she stood before him, and he could see her clearly despite the storm. She was a woman, but such a woman as he had never seen. She was tall and slender, dressed in a pure white kimono that seemed to be made of snow itself. Her skin was pale as ice, almost translucent, and her hair was long and black, a stark contrast to her white garments. Her face was beautiful but cold, inhumanly perfect, like a statue carved from frozen water. And her eyes were the pale blue of ice on a mountain lake, ancient and pitiless. She moved without disturbing the snow, gliding rather than walking, and the storm seemed apart before her like a curtain. When she stood over him, looking down at his huddled, freezing form, Taro knew with absolute certainty what she was. The Yuki-onna, the snow woman, the spirit of winter storms. The stories said she appeared during blizzards, that she froze travelers with her icy breath, that she drank their warmth and life force, leaving only frozen corpses behind. "Oh, you are dying," she said, and her voice was like wind over ice, beautiful and terrible. "I can feel your warmth fading. Soon you will be gone, and your body will remain here until the spring thaw." Taro tried to speak, but his lips were too numb, too cold. He could only stare up at her with failing eyes. The Yuki-onna knelt beside him, her movements graceful and unhurried. "I could take what little warmth remains in you," she said. "It would be easy. One breath, one touch, and your suffering would end. You would simply sleep, and the cold would no longer hurt." She reached out one hand, and even through his glove, Taro felt the impossible cold of her touch. It was beyond mere physical cold. It was the cold of the void, of empty space, of death itself. Where her fingers touched his wrist, frost formed instantly on his glove. But then, something strange happened. The Yuki Onna paused, her hand still on his wrist, and her expression changed. The cold indifference in her eyes flickered, replaced by something that might have been curiosity or even confusion. "Ah, your heart still beats," she said slowly, "but not with fear, not with the panic I usually feel in those I find. Your heart beats with sadness. Why?" Taro managed to move his lips, though no sound came at first. He tried again, forcing the words past frozen lips and through numbed tongue. "My mother," he whispered. "She will wait for me. She will never know what happened." The Yuki Onna tilted her head, studying him with those ice-pale eyes. "You think of her, not of yourself, not of your own death." "I have no fear of death," Taro managed to say, each word an effort. "But she has already lost my father to the mountains. To lose me as well, it will break her heart. That is my only sorrow." For a long moment, the Yuki Onna was silent. The storm raged around them, but in the small space where she knelt, the wind was still, the snow falling gently, almost peacefully. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, less like wind and more like water over stones. "In all the centuries I have walked the winter storms, I have taken countless travelers. Some fought, some begged, some simply accepted their fate. But none, not one, thought first of another's grief rather than their own fear. You are strange, young human. Strange and foolish, but perhaps there is courage in such foolishness." She withdrew her hand from his wrist, and where she had touched, Taro felt a strange tingling warmth beginning to return. The Yuki Onna stood, looking down at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Ah, I will show you mercy," she said. "Just this once. I will let you live, young fool who thinks of his mother before himself. But you must promise me something." "What must I promise?" Taro asked, his voice still weak but growing stronger. "Ah, you must never speak of me to anyone," the Yuki Onna said, and her voice became hard as ice again. "Not of this night, not of this meeting, not of my mercy. If you tell anyone what happened here, if you describe me or reveal that you saw me, I will return for you, and I will show no mercy a second time. Do you understand? Swear to me." "I swear," Taro said without hesitation. "I will never speak of this night to anyone." The Yuki Onna nodded, seeming satisfied. Then she did something that surprised him even more. She reached out and touched his forehead with one pale finger, and this time, instead of cold, he felt warmth. It spread through his body like fire through dry grass, chasing away the deadly chill, bringing feeling back to his numb limbs. "Oh, follow the wind," she said. "When the storm lessens, and it will soon, walk with the wind at your back. It will lead you to shelter. Now sleep, but only for a short while. You will wake when it is time to walk." And with that, she was gone, fading into the snow as though she had never been. Taro's eyes grew heavy, but this time it was natural sleep, not the sleep of death. He slept, and when he woke, The storm had indeed lessened. The wind had dropped to a steady push from the north, and following her instructions, he walked with it at his back. Within an hour, he stumbled into the clearing where the charcoal hut stood, and found his master there, alive and well, tending to the kilns and waiting anxiously for him. "I thought I had lost you, boy," his master said, embracing him. "I thought the storm had taken you." "I found shelter," Taro said, and would say no more, remembering his promise. He returned to his village, to his mother's tearful embrace, and he kept his promise. He never spoke of the Yuki Onna, not to his master, not to his mother, not to his friends. The years passed. He grew from a boy into a man, completed his apprenticeship, became a charcoal maker himself, and eventually met a woman whom he loved. Her name was Yuki, like mine, the shrine maiden said, with a gentle smile. And yes, the same name as the Snow Woman, which my grandfather found both troubling and amusing. She was beautiful, with pale skin and dark hair, and she was kind and gentle. They married, and they were happy. They had children, and among them was my mother. But here is the strange thing, Yuki continued, her voice dropping lower. My grandfather's wife, my grandmother Yuki, came to the village from the mountains. No one knew her family. She appeared one spring, saying she had traveled from a distant province, that her family had all died, that she sought a new life. Some thought this strange, but she was so kind, so helpful, that the village accepted her. She and my grandfather lived together for 50 years. She bore him 4 children, helped him in his work, tended their home, and was beloved by all who knew her. She never grew old as quickly as other women. Even at 70, she looked 20 years younger. Her skin still smooth, her hair still dark with only touches of silver. People remarked on this, but in an admiring way, as if she simply had good fortune. Then, on the night of my grandfather's 80th year, when they sat together by their hearth with their children and grandchildren gathered around, my grandmother looked at my grandfather and smiled. "Do you remember," she asked him, "the promise you made in the snow?" The room fell silent. My grandfather's face went pale, and his hands began to shake. "Yes," he whispered, "I remember." "Ah, you kept your promise," she said gently. "For 50 years you never spoke of me, never revealed what happened that night. Even to me, when I came to you in spring, you said nothing. You accepted me without question, loved me without knowing what I was. That took courage and trust." My mother told me that my grandfather wept then, understanding finally, knowing the truth. His wife, the mother of his children, was the Yuki Onna, the snow woman who had spared him in the storm. "I showed you mercy," my grandmother said, "because you thought of another before yourself, and in return you showed me what it meant to be human, to love and be loved, to build a life rather than take one. You gave me 50 years of warmth, and I am grateful." "Will you leave now?" my grandfather asked, his voice breaking. "My time among humans is ending," she said. "I feel the call of winter, the pull of the storms, but I wanted you to know the truth before I go. I wanted you to know that I loved you truly, even though I am not human, even though love was something I had to learn." She stood then, and my mother said she saw her grandmother begin to fade, becoming translucent like ice melting in sunlight. She touched each of her children and grandchildren a blessing and farewell, and then she looked at me. I was only 7, but I remember her eyes, so pale and ancient, yet filled with a warmth that seemed impossible for a creature of ice and snow. "Ah, you will understand, little one," she said to me. "You will serve at the shrine, and you will help others understand that the yokai are not simply monsters or spirits. We are teachers, reflections, bridges between worlds. Remember me, and remember that mercy and love can exist anywhere, even in the coldest heart." And then she was gone, fading into mist, and the room was suddenly warmer, as though winter had left the house. My grandfather lived another year before he passed peacefully in his sleep. And I took the name she had borne, and I dedicated myself to the shrine, to serving as a bridge between the human and spirit worlds, just as she had asked. Yuki fell silent, her story told, and there were tears glistening in her eyes, though her face was calm. The room was utterly quiet. Even the storm outside seemed to have gentled, as though listening. Finally, old Hiroshi spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "That is a story of profound grace," he said, "both given and received. Your grandmother learned humanity, and through her, your family learned that the supernatural can hold compassion." Otsuru was wiping her own eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "I have heard many tales of the Yuki-onna," she said, "and most end in sorrow and death. This is the first I have heard that ends in love and understanding." Takeshi nodded slowly. "It shows that even the most fearsome yokai can change, can grow. Perhaps that is true of all beings, spirit or human." Kenji had been staring into the fire, and now he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Your grandfather's silence was his gift to her. He trusted her even when he must have suspected what she was. That trust allowed her to become more than she had been." Young Sato looked awed and a bit overwhelmed. "So she was good. The Yuki-onna, not evil." Yuki smiled at him gently. "She was neither good nor evil, Sato-kun. She was a force of nature like winter itself. Winter can be deadly, yes, but it can also be beautiful, necessary part of the cycle of life. My grandmother simply learned to be more than she had been, to embrace warmth as well as cold. That is the gift my grandfather gave her, and the gift she gave to all of us." The fire crackled, and outside the wind had indeed softened. The storm was still there, but gentler now, more like falling snow than a raging blizzard. Otsuru rose and brought out small rice cakes she had been keeping warm by the fire, offering them around. As everyone took one, grateful for the sweetness after the emotional weight of the story, she settled back down with a thoughtful expression. "2 stories so far," she said, "and both teach us important lessons. That the greatest treasures cannot be bought, and that even ice can melt into love. But not all yokai stories are so serious, are they? Sometimes the spirits play tricks not to harm or teach deep lessons, but simply because they find joy in mischief. She looked around the circle with a glimmer of humor in her old eyes. Shall I tell you of the tanuki, those rascally raccoon dogs who delight in fooling humans? I have a story from my youth, one that still makes me laugh when I remember it. The mood in the room lifted, everyone sensing that the next tale would be lighter, more amusing. Young Sato looked particularly relieved, as the previous stories had been intense. Please, Otsuru-san, Yuki said. I think we could all use a story that brings laughter. Very well, Otsuru said, her wrinkled face breaking into a mischievous grin that made her look decades younger. Then let me tell you about the summer I was 17, and how an entire village, including my very serious father, was tricked into attending a festival that never existed. Otsuru's eyes sparkled with mischief as she settled more comfortably by the fire, and the travelers could see the young girl she had once been shining through her aged features. I grew up in a village much like this one, she began. Nestled in the mountains where the forests were thick and the streams ran clear. It was a good village, hard-working and honest, but perhaps a bit too serious. My father was the headman, and he took his duties very gravely. Everything had to be proper. Everything had to follow tradition exactly. If there was a festival, it must be organized months in advance with appropriate offerings and rituals. If there was a celebration, everyone must behave with dignity. He was not a bad man, you understand, just very stern, very proper. That summer, I was 17, and I confess I found village life rather dull. The same routines, the same faces, the same everything. I longed for excitement, for something unexpected to happen. I should have been more careful what I wished for. It began on a warm evening in late summer. I had gone to the stream to wash vegetables for our evening meal, and as I worked I heard the most peculiar sound. It was like drumming, but irregular, playful, coming from the forest just beyond the rice fields. Thump, 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 pause, thump, thump, pause, thump, 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 thump. Curious, I set down my basket and followed the sound. I knew I should not wander into the forest alone, but I was 17 and thought myself very brave. I pushed through the bushes and found myself in a small clearing, and there, sitting on a fallen log, was a tanuki. Now, you might think, just a raccoon dog, nothing special. But this was no ordinary tanuki. For one thing, it was quite large, easily the size of a small bear. For another, it was sitting upright like a human, and it was using its round belly as a drum, slapping it with its paws to create the sound I had heard. When it saw me, it stopped and grinned, showing all its teeth in a very unanimal-like expression. "Hello, human girl," it said, and yes, it spoke perfect human speech. "Have you come to enjoy my music?" I should have run. Any sensible person would have run. But I was fascinated, and also, I will admit, a bit tired of being sensible. "Ah, you are a Bekemono," I said, using the old word for shapeshifter. "A supernatural tanuki." "Very clever," the tanuki said, still grinning. "And you are not screaming or running, which makes you either very brave or very foolish. Which is it?" "I am not sure yet," I answered honestly. The tanuki laughed, a sound like rumbling thunder mixed with cackling. I like you, human girl. You have spirit. Tell me, is your village always so dull, so serious? I have been watching it for some time, and everyone always looks so grim, so worried about propriety. My father runs the village, I said with a sigh. He believes in doing everything correctly, which means doing everything seriously. Ah, how boring, the tanuki said, shaking its head so its ears flopped comically. How utterly dreary. Humans should laugh more, play more. Life is too short for such seriousness, especially for you humans who live such tiny little lifespans. I agree, I said before I could stop myself. The tanuki's eyes gleamed with mischief. Then perhaps we should teach them a lesson. Nothing harmful, you understand. Just a bit of fun to help them remember how to laugh. What do you say, human girl? Want to help me play a trick on your village? I knew I should refuse. I knew my father would be furious if he found out. But the thought of seeing him laugh, of seeing the whole serious village loosen up just a little, was too tempting. What sort of trick? I asked cautiously. The tanuki rubbed its paws together gleefully. Leave that to me. I am a master of illusions and transformations. You just need to do one thing. Tomorrow morning you must mention casually to someone, anyone, that you heard there will be a grand festival tomorrow night in the forest clearing beyond the rice fields. A traveling lord is hosting it to thank the village for their hard work. Free food, free sake, entertainment. Make it sound exciting. And then what? I asked. And then watch, the tanuki said. Trust me, it will be magnificent. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next morning, I mentioned to one of the village women quite casually while shopping for rice that I had heard something about a festival. Just a rumor, I said, but apparently a generous lord was passing through and wanted to show appreciation to the village. She asked where I heard this, and I just shrugged mysteriously. By midday, the whole village was buzzing with talk of the festival. People swore they had heard about it from someone who heard it from someone else. My father, ever the responsible head man, tried to investigate the source of the rumor, but everyone pointed to someone different. It was like trying to catch smoke. By evening, despite my father's skepticism, half the village had decided to attend. How could they not? Free food and sake, entertainment, a chance for celebration. Even my stern father decided he should go, if only to see what this mysterious lord wanted, and to ensure everything was proper. As the sun set, people began making their way to the clearing beyond the rice fields, dressed in their best clothes, carrying gifts for the generous lord, excited and chattering like children. I went with my father, my heart pounding with excitement and more than a little guilt. The clearing, when we arrived, was transformed. Lanterns hung from every tree, glowing with warm light, though I saw no candles inside them. Long tables had been set up, groaning under the weight of food. Rice cakes, grilled fish, vegetables, fruits, sweets of every description. Barrels of sake stood at each corner, and in the center of the clearing was a raised platform where musicians played cheerful festival music on flutes and drums. The mysterious lord sat on a cushioned chair at the head of the main table, dressed in elaborate robes, his face partially hidden by a ceremonial mask. He welcomed everyone with broad gestures encouraging them to eat, drink, and be merry. My father approached cautiously to pay respects, and the lord boomed out, "No formality tonight. Tonight we celebrate. Eat, drink, dance, enjoy." Ah, and the villagers did. Oh, how they did. My stern father, after 3 cups of sake, was laughing louder than I had ever heard. The serious elder, who always lectured children about proper behavior, was dancing with the awkward enthusiasm of someone who had not danced in decades. The school teacher, who never smiled, was singing at the top of his lungs. Everyone was having the time of their lives. I admit I got caught up in it too. The food was delicious, the sake was smooth, and the music was infectious. We danced and laughed and celebrated until the moon was high in the sky. But as midnight approached, I began to notice strange things. The Lord never removed his mask, never ate or drank, just watched us with what seemed like great amusement. The musicians never seemed to tire, never took breaks, and when I looked closely at the food, I realized that no matter how much we ate, the platters remained full. Then, as the temple bell in our village struck midnight, everything changed. The Lord stood and removed his mask, and there was the tanuki, grinning enormously. The musicians were revealed as other tanuki, several of them, all drumming on their bellies. The elaborate tables and decorations shimmered and faded like morning mist. We stood there, the entire village, in an ordinary forest clearing. No tables, no food, no decorations. Just us, dressed in our finest clothes, standing in the dark forest looking at a group of tanuki who were laughing so hard they were rolling on the ground. "Thank you for coming to my festival," the large tanuki called out, still grinning. "Did you enjoy yourselves?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Then my father, the stern village headman, began to laugh. Not angry laughter, but genuine deep belly laughter. And soon everyone was laughing, because really, what else could we do? We had been thoroughly tricked, fooled into attending a festival that existed only in our minds, created by tanuki magic and illusion. Ah! "We were played for fools," someone shouted, but they were laughing as they said it. "Indeed you were," the tanuki agreed cheerfully. "But you had fun, did you not? When was the last time this village had such a party? When was the last time you all laughed together like this?" My father, still chuckling, shook his head. "We have been tricked, yes. But the rascal has a point. We have been too serious, too focused on propriety. We forgot how to simply enjoy ourselves." "Ah, exactly," the tanuki said, looking pleased. "That was my lesson. You humans work so hard, worry so much. Sometimes you need to be reminded to laugh, to play, to not take everything so seriously. But the food," someone said, "the sake. We felt full, satisfied. How?" The tanuki's grin widened impossibly. "Ah, that was not entirely illusion. I may have borrowed some supplies from various storehouses in the region. And do not worry, I left payment. In the form of other illusions that will make crops grow better, scare away pests, that sort of thing. Fair trade, I think." We made our way back to the village, still laughing and talking about the incredible trick we had experienced. The next morning we discovered that the tanuki had been true to his word. Our rice storehouse was indeed missing several sacks of rice, but in the fields we found that our crops were healthier than ever, free of the beetles and birds that usually plagued us. Several villagers found small gifts on their doorsteps, wooden carvings of tanuki, perfectly crafted, though no one knew who had made them. But the greatest gift the tanuki gave us was the memory of that night, the reminder that joy and laughter were as important as duty and propriety. My father became a little less stern after that. The village held more festivals, real ones this time. And whenever things became too serious, someone would say, "Remember the Tanuki's festival?" And we would all smile and lighten up a bit. I saw the Tanuki only once more, years later, when I was passing through the forest. He was sitting on his log, drumming on his belly. When he saw me, he grinned and waved. "Ah, still remember the festival?" he called out. "How could I forget?" I answered. "It was the best party I ever attended, even though it was not real." Oh, it was real," the Tanuki said seriously. "The food may have been illusion, the decorations may have been magic, but the joy, the laughter, the togetherness, that was all real. That is what matters." And then he vanished into the forest, and I heard his laughter echoing through the trees. Otsuru finished her story and looked around at her listeners, all of whom were smiling. Even Kenji's serious face had softened into something close to amusement. "That is wonderful," Sato said, grinning widely, "a trick that was actually a gift." "Tanuki are known for their playful nature," Yuki said. "They rarely mean harm. They simply like to remind us not to be so rigid, so bound by rules that we forget to live." Takeshi was nodding. "I have heard that Tanuki leave gifts for those they like. Wooden carvings, as you said, or sometimes coins that turn out to be leaves the next day, but somehow those leaves bring good fortune anyway." Hiroshi stroked his chin thoughtfully. "The Buddha taught the middle way, balance between extremes. Your Tanuki taught the same lesson in his own fashion. Duty is important, yes, but so is joy. Both are necessary for a complete life." Otsuru looked pleased. "Exactly so. The Tanuki understood what we had forgotten, and sometimes it takes a trickster to show us our own foolishness." The mood in the room had lightened considerably. The storm outside had gentled further, now just a steady fall of snow rather than a howling blizzard. The fire burned warm and cheerful, and the travelers felt the comfortable camaraderie of shared stories and shared shelter. Otsuru poured more tea for everyone, and as she did, she glanced at Hiroshi. The old monk had been listening attentively to all the stories, his weathered face serene, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he had stories of his own, perhaps more serious than a Tanuki's tricks. "Ah, honorable monk," Otsuru said respectfully, "you have traveled the mountains for many years, studied in the high temples. Surely you have encountered the supernatural in your journeys." Hiroshi was quiet for a moment. his hands wrapped around his teacup, his eyes distant with memory. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried a weight that made everyone lean forward to listen. "I have," he said simply, "and of all the yokai I have encountered, the most profound experience was with a tengu, the bird-like demon warriors who live in the highest peaks, who test monks and ascetics, who teach through trial and challenge. What I learned from the tengu changed the course of my life and brought me closer to enlightenment than any amount of meditation could have done alone." He looked up, his old eyes sharp and clear. "But I warn you, this story is not light like the Tanuki's tricks. It is about pride, humility, and the thin line between life and death." The room fell quiet, the atmosphere shifting from light-hearted to serious. Everyone sensed that this story would be different, deeper, perhaps more challenging. Hiroshi took a sip of his tea, set down the cup with careful precision, and began to speak. "I was not always a humble monk," Hiroshi began, and there was a trace of sadness in his voice. "When I was young, perhaps 30 years old, I was proud, dangerously proud. I had studied at the great monasteries, learned from renowned masters, mastered sutras that took others a lifetime to understand. I could sit in meditation for days without moving, recite texts perfectly from memory, perform rituals with flawless precision, and I knew it. I wore my accomplishments like fine robes, and I looked down upon those who had not achieved what I had achieved. My abbot was a wise man, and he saw the poison of pride growing in me. He called me to his chambers one autumn morning and said, 'Hiroshi, you have learned much, but you have understood little. I am sending you to the mountain temple of Takao, where you will spend 1 year in isolated practice. Perhaps the mountain will teach you what I cannot.' I accepted this assignment, but in my heart, I was pleased. The mountain temple of Takao was legendary, a place where only the most dedicated monks trained. I thought this was a recognition of my abilities, not the correction my abbot intended. I thought I would go, demonstrate my superiority, and return even more accomplished. The temple at Takao was built into the mountainside at a dizzying height, accessible only by a narrow, treacherous path that wound up through ancient cedar forests. It took me 3 days to climb to it, and with each step the air grew thinner, the world grew quieter. By the time I reached the temple gates, I was exhausted but exhilarated. This high place close to the heavens seemed fitting for someone of my abilities. The master of the temple was a monk called Zenkai, ancient beyond measure, his face so weathered by mountain winds that it resembled carved stone. He greeted me without warmth or welcome, simply pointed to a small meditation hut on the very edge of a cliff and said, "That will be your home for the year. You will meditate, you will study, you will work in silence. Speak only when spoken to. Move with humility. Learn what the mountain has to teach." I bowed respectfully, but inside I was thinking that this would be easy. Meditation. I could meditate better than anyone. Study. I had memorized more texts than most monks read in a lifetime. I was confident, perhaps even arrogant. The first month passed easily enough. I meditated for hours, sat zazen until my legs went numb, studied sutras by candlelight, but I was doing it all with pride, with a sense of my own superiority. I was going through the motions without understanding the purpose. It was on a misty morning in my 2nd month when I first saw the Tengu. I had risen before dawn to perform my morning meditation on the cliff edge where my hut stood. The world was wrapped in fog so thick I could barely see a few paces in any direction. I sat in the lotus position, my back straight, my breathing controlled, and I felt very pleased with myself. Here I was, a monk of such discipline that I could sit perfectly still on a cliff edge in the cold morning mist. That was when I heard the sound of wings. Not bird wings, but something larger, more powerful. The fog before me began to swirl and part, and through it stepped a figure that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a Tengu, but not the small, mischievous kind that plays tricks on travelers. This was a mountain Tengu, a Dai Tengu, one of the great ones. He stood perhaps 7 feet tall with the body of a man, but the face of a bird of prey, a long, sharp beak, fierce yellow eyes, and a crest of red feathers. He wore the robes of a monk, but they were ancient and tattered, and he carried a staff of blackened wood. Most striking were his wings, massive black feathered wings that spread wide as he landed, creating a wind that nearly knocked me over. I had heard of the Tengu all my life. They were said to be warrior spirits dwelling in the highest mountains, fierce and dangerous. Some said they had once been monks themselves, but monks who fell into pride and arrogance, who became so attached to their own abilities that they transformed into demons. Others said they were guardians of the mountains, testing those who sought enlightenment, separating the worthy from the unworthy. The Tengu looked down at me with those yellow eyes, and when he spoke his voice was like gravel grinding against stone. "You sit very prettily, little monk. Tell me, what are you meditating upon?" I should have been terrified, but my pride would not let me show fear. "I meditate upon emptiness, upon the void, upon the cessation of suffering," I said, reciting the proper words. Do you?" the Tengu asked, tilting his beaked head. "Or do you meditate upon how well you meditate, upon how impressed others would be if they could see you sitting here so perfectly?" His words struck too close to truth, and I felt anger rise in me. "You know nothing of my practice," I said sharply. The Tengu laughed, a harsh, cawing sound. "I know everything about your practice, proud one. I have been watching you for weeks. You perform all the rituals perfectly, yes, but your heart is full of yourself. You think you are special, superior. You have confused the form of practice with its substance. You are a demon," I said coldly. "Why should I listen to anything you say?" "Oh, demon?" The Tengu's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. "Perhaps, but I was once a monk like you, before pride consumed me and transformed me into this form. I became so attached to my own abilities, so certain of my own enlightenment, that I forgot the first principle of the Buddha's teaching. Do you know what that is, little monk?" I recited automatically, "All things are impermanent. All things are without permanent self. All existence is suffering." "Words," the Tengu spat, empty words that you have memorized without understanding, let me teach you what they truly mean. Before I could react, the Tengu's staff swept out and struck the ground beside me. The cliff edge beneath my meditation hut cracked with a sound like thunder, and suddenly I was falling, tumbling through the mist, my robes flapping around me, the ground far below rushing up to meet me. Terror, pure and absolute, filled me. This was death. I was going to die, broken on the rocks below, and all my learning, all my accomplishments would mean nothing. In that moment of falling, my pride evaporated like morning dew. What good was my perfect meditation now? What value had my memorized sutras when I was seconds from oblivion? I closed my eyes, accepting death, and felt a strange calm settle over me. If this was the end, then this was the end. All things are impermanent, I thought, and for the first time I truly understood those words. My life, my achievements, my pride, all impermanent, all meaningless in the face of death. Then I stopped falling. I opened my eyes to find myself suspended in the air, held by one of the Tengu's powerful hands. He had caught me just before I would have struck the rocks. We hovered there in the mist, and he brought his beaked face close to mine. "Now you begin to understand," he said quietly. "In the moment of losing everything, you let go of your pride. That is the first step toward true enlightenment." He carried me back to the cliff edge and set me down gently. My legs could not support me, and I collapsed, trembling uncontrollably. The terror of my near death would not leave me. "You will remember this moment," the Tengu said, standing over me. "You will remember that all your accomplishments, all your knowledge, all your pride mean nothing when faced with impermanence. You are not special, little monk. You are not superior. You are simply another being in this world of suffering, searching for the way out." "Ah, I understand," I whispered, and I truly did. The pride that had filled me for so long had been burned away by fear and the acceptance of death. "Do you?" the Tengu asked. "We will see. I will test you twice more before your year is done. If you fail, I will let you fall, and next time I will not catch you. If you succeed, perhaps you will become what you pretend to be, a true monk, humble and wise." And with that, he spread his great wings and launched himself into the mist, disappearing as suddenly as he had appeared. I spent the rest of that day in my hut, shaking, unable to meditate, unable to do anything but remember the sensation of falling, of helplessness, of my own mortality. When I finally emerged, Master Zenkai looked at me with knowing eyes. "You met him," the old monk said. It was not a question. "The Tengu," I confirmed. "He nearly killed me." "Oh, no," Master Zenkai corrected. "He nearly let you kill yourself. There is a difference. Your pride put you in danger. He simply showed you the consequence." The next 3 months passed differently than the first 2. I still meditated, still studied, still performed my duties, but now without pride, without the sense that I was special or superior. I saw my practice for what it truly was. Not a competition, not a performance, but a genuine attempt to understand suffering and find release from it. The Tengu appeared to me a second time on a snowy winter morning. I was carrying water from the stream to the temple, a simple task that I performed daily. The path was icy, treacherous, and I walked carefully, focused on each step. The Tengu landed in front of me, blocking my path, his wings sending snow swirling around us. "Ah, tell me, little monk," he said, "what makes you worthy of enlightenment? What makes you better than the peasant in the valley, the merchant on the road, the soldier in his barracks?" 3 months before, I would have had an answer ready, a list of my accomplishments and learning. But now I understood the trap in the question. "Ha, nothing," I said simply. "I am not better. I am not more worthy. We are all equally trapped in this cycle of suffering, all equally seeking release. The only difference is that I have been fortunate enough to receive teaching, but that is luck, not merit." The Tengu studied me with those fierce yellow eyes, and I met his gaze without arrogance or fear, simply with honesty. "Better," he said finally. "You are learning, but understanding with the mind is not the same as understanding with the heart. Your third test will come when you least expect it." And again he vanished into the snow. The months passed. Winter turned to spring, spring to summer. My year at the mountain temple was nearly complete. I had changed in ways I could not have imagined when I first arrived. The proud young monk who had climbed the mountain path was gone, replaced by someone quieter, more humble, more aware of his own limitations. The third test came on my last day at the temple, as I was preparing to descend the mountain and return to my home monastery. I was walking the cliff path one final time, saying farewell to this place that had transformed me, when I heard a cry for help. Looking down, I saw a young monk, perhaps 20 years old, clinging to the cliff face just below the path. He had apparently attempted to climb up a shortcut and had become stuck, unable to climb higher or retreat safely. "Ah, help me!" he called, his voice filled with panic. "Please, I cannot hold on much longer." I looked around for rope, for anything to help him, but there was nothing. To reach him, I would have to climb down to him, to put myself in danger on that treacherous cliff face. And then I heard the sound of wings, and I knew. This was the third test. The Tengu appeared beside me, visible only to me. The young monk below could not see him. "Ah, here is your choice, little monk," the Tengu said softly. "You can try to save him, but the cliff is unstable, and you may both fall. You have learned much this year. You are valuable now, a teacher in the making. Why risk all that for one foolish young monk who was stupid enough to take a dangerous shortcut? The wise choice would be to go for help, even if he falls while you are gone. You would survive. You could continue your path toward enlightenment. Is one life worth risking too? It was a cruel test, and I knew it. The Tengu was offering me a justification for cowardice, a logical reason to put my own safety first. And a year ago, I might have taken it, might have found a way to rationalize leaving the young monk to his fate. But I had learned something in that moment of falling, in those seconds when I thought I would die. I had learned that my life was not more valuable than anyone else's, that my supposed enlightenment meant nothing if I used it as an excuse to ignore suffering. "All beings want to live," I said quietly. All beings fear death. If I can help him, I must, regardless of the risk to myself. That is compassion. That is what the Buddha taught. I began to climb down toward the young monk, carefully, slowly, testing each handhold. The Tengu watched but said nothing. It took me perhaps 10 minutes to reach the young monk, though it felt like hours. When I got to him, his hands were slipping, his strength nearly gone. I braced myself as best I could and helped him find footholds, talking to him calmly, guiding him up toward the path. We were halfway up when my own handhold cracked and gave way. I felt myself starting to fall, felt the same terror as before, but this time I held firm to the young monk, determined that if I fell at least I would not take him with me. I prepared to let go, to release my grip on him so he could save himself. But again, strong hands caught me. The Tengu, visible now even to the young monk, held us both, his wings beating powerfully as he lifted us up to the path and set us down safely. The young monk collapsed, gasping and grateful, but I stood and faced the Tengu, and I saw something in his fierce eyes that I had not seen before. Respect. "Ha ha! You have passed the 3rd test," the Tengu said, his harsh voice somehow softer. "You were willing to sacrifice yourself for another, not out of pride or desire to be seen as heroic, but out of genuine compassion. You have learned what I could not learn in my own lifetime. You have learned that true strength is humility, that true wisdom is compassion, that enlightenment is not about elevating yourself, but about recognizing your connection to all beings." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he bowed. A Tengu, a great mountain demon, bowed to a simple monk. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have reminded me of what I lost. Perhaps there is hope for me yet." And then he spread his wings and launched himself into the sky, and I never saw him again. But I carry his lessons with me every day. Pride is a poison. Compassion is the path. And we are all, every one of us, equally precious and equally fragile. Hiroshi fell silent, his story complete. The room was heavy with the weight of his words, with the profound truths he had shared. Yuki was the first to speak, her voice soft. "That is a teaching worth a lifetime of study. Thank you for sharing it, Hiroshi-san." Takeshi nodded slowly. "The Tengu was once a monk like you, transformed by pride. But perhaps your compassion helped him remember his own Buddha nature." Kenji had been listening intently, and now he spoke, his voice rough with emotion, compassion in the face of danger. That is true courage, not the absence of fear, but the choice to act rightly despite fear. Otsuru was wiping tears from her weathered cheeks. "You are a true teacher, Hiroshi-san. The mountain gave you exactly the lesson you needed." Young Sato looked both awed and thoughtful. "So even demons can be teachers. Even yokai that seem cruel can help us become better." "Yes," Hiroshi said gently. "But we must be willing to learn, willing to let go of our pride and see the truth. That is the hardest part." The fire crackled, and outside the snow had stopped entirely. The storm had passed, leaving only a deep silence and the promise of clear skies. Inside the crane's rest, the travelers sat in contemplative quiet, each absorbing the lessons of the stories they had heard. After a few moments, Otsuru rose to tend the fire, adding another log, and as the flames grew brighter, she looked at Kenji. The Ronin had been quiet through most of the evening, speaking only briefly, but his attention had been complete. There was a weight to him, a sense of untold stories and heavy memories. "Kenji-san," Otsuru said gently, "you have been most patient listening to all our tales, but surely a warrior who has walked the roads as you have must have encountered the supernatural. Would you honor us with a story?" Kenji was silent for a long moment, his scarred hands resting on his knees, his eyes on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of lived experience. "I have one story," he said. "It is not as profound as the monk's tale, nor as light-hearted as the tanuki's tricks. But it taught me something important about honor, about strength, and about what it means to be truly powerful. It is the story of how I met a kappa, a water demon, and learned that victory is not always what it seems." He looked up, and in his eyes, the travelers could see the memory of the warrior he had been and the man he had become. "This happened 5 years ago, when I still served a lord before I became Ronin, masterless. I was proud then, confident in my skill with the sword, certain that strength and martial ability were what mattered most. I was about to learn otherwise. I was in service to Lord Nakamura," Kenji began, his voice steady but tinged with old sorrow. "A good lord, fair and just, and I was proud to wear his colors. I was considered one of his best swordsmen, skilled and dedicated. Perhaps too proud of my abilities, if I am honest. It was summer, and Lord Nakamura sent me on a mission to investigate reports of travelers disappearing near a river crossing about 2 days' journey from his castle. The local villagers were frightened, claiming that a demon haunted the river, pulling people into the water. Lord Nakamura did not believe in such tales, or so he claimed, but he was wise enough to investigate, rather than dismiss the fears of his people. I traveled to the village, arriving in late afternoon when the sun was still high and hot. The villagers greeted me with relief and fear in equal measure, grateful that someone had come to help, but clearly worried for my safety. They told me that 6 people had disappeared over the past 2 months, all at the same crossing point where the river ran shallow and wide. It is a kappa," the village elder told me, his face grave. "A water demon. It lives in the deep pool just upstream from the crossing. It has grown bold, no longer content with cucumbers and offerings. Now it hunts people. I knew of kappa from stories, of course. They were said to be water creatures roughly the size of a child, with green scaly skin, webbed hands and feet, a turtle-like shell on their backs, and a bow-like depression on top of their heads that held water. This water was their source of power, and if it spilled, they became weak and helpless. The tales said they loved cucumbers, enjoyed sumo wrestling, and were extremely polite, despite being dangerous. They were known to drown people and livestock, pulling them underwater with supernatural strength. "I will deal with this creature," I told the elder confidently. "Show me the crossing." The elder led me to the river as the sun began to set. It was a beautiful spot, I had to admit, with clear water running over smooth stones and tall reeds growing along the banks. The crossing was indeed shallow, the water barely knee-deep in most places. Upstream, I could see a deeper pool where the water ran dark and still. "Atoo, that is where it lives," the elder said, pointing to the pool. "It comes out at dusk, looking for prey. Please, samurai, be careful. It's stronger than it looks and clever. It challenged the last samurai who came here to a sumo match. He accepted, thinking to defeat it easily, but it pulled him into the water and drowned him. His body was found 3 days later downstream. I should have heeded his warning, should have listened to the genuine fear in his voice, but I was young and proud, and I thought I knew better. 'I will not fall for such tricks,' I said dismissively. 'I am no fool to accept challenges from demons.' I took up a position near the crossing, sitting on a large rock where I could watch the deep pool. My swords rested across my knees, ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. The elder and the other villagers retreated to a safe distance, watching anxiously. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I saw movement in the pool. The water rippled, and a figure emerged, climbing onto the rocks at the pool's edge. It was indeed a kappa, exactly as the stories described, perhaps 4 feet tall, with green scaled skin that glistened wetly in the fading light. Its hands and feet were webbed, and I could see the shell on its back. Its face was somewhat turtle-like, with a beaked mouth and large ancient eyes. And yes, on top of its head was a bowl-like depression filled with water that somehow defied gravity and did not spill even when the creature moved. The kappa saw me and seemed pleased rather than frightened. It walked toward me with an odd, waddling gait, and when it spoke, its voice was surprisingly cultured, polite even. "Ah, a samurai. Welcome, warrior. Have you come to challenge me? It has been too long since I had a proper match. These villagers and travelers provide poor sport. I have come to stop you from harming people," I said coldly. "No more will die at this crossing." The kappa tilted its head, water sloshing slightly in the bowl atop its skull. "Stop me? And how do you propose to do that, samurai? Will you cut me down with your swords? That would be dishonorable, would it not? A warrior attacking an unarmed opponent." The creature had a point, and it knew it. The code of Bushido that governs samurai behavior was strict about such things. To simply attack the kappa would be shameful, unless it attacked me first. "Then I challenge you to a duel," I said. "Swords here and now. If you win, I leave. If I win, you stop harming people and leave this place." The kappa laughed, a gurgling sound like water over stones. "But I have no sword, samurai, and even if I did, you are trained in such weapons while I am not. That would hardly be fair, would it? No. If you wish to challenge me, it must be in a contest where we are more evenly matched." "What contest?" I asked warily. "Ah, sumo wrestling," the kappa said, its eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Strength against strength, skill against skill, balance against balance, no weapons, no tricks, just pure combat. If you win, I will leave this place forever and harm no more humans. If I win, you will serve me for 1 year, fetching me food and doing my bidding." I should have refused. I should have found another way, but my pride would not allow me to back down from a challenge, especially not from a creature the size of a child. How difficult could it be to defeat something so small? "I accept," I said, and as the words left my mouth, I saw the Kappa's smile widen. We moved to a flat area near the river, a natural circle of smooth stones that would serve as our wrestling ring. The villagers had crept closer, drawn by morbid curiosity despite their fear. The Kappa and I faced each other. I had removed my swords and my outer robe, standing in just my hakama pants and underrobe. The Kappa crouched in the traditional sumo stance, surprisingly professional in its positioning. "Are you ready, samurai?" it asked. "Ready," I confirmed. We engaged, and immediately I understood my mistake. The Kappa was strong, far stronger than its small size suggested. When I grabbed it to attempt to throw, it felt like grabbing a boulder wrapped in wet leather. Its grip on my arms was like iron, and its webbed feet found purchase on the stones with ease. We grappled, neither able to gain a clear advantage. I was larger and had better technique, but the Kappa's supernatural strength balanced this. Sweat poured down my face, my muscles screamed with effort, and still we struggled, locked together in a test of will and power. Then I remembered the stories. The bowl on top of the Kappa's head, filled with water, was its source of power. If I could make it spill, the creature would weaken. I began to maneuver, trying to force the Kappa to bow, to tilt its head forward enough that the water would spill. The Kappa realized what I was attempting, and fought harder, keeping its head carefully level. But I was patient, and finally I saw my opportunity. I feinted left, then pulled right with all my strength, bending the Kappa forward sharply. The water in the bowl sloshed dangerously, and I saw panic flash across the creature's face. One more pull, one more moment, and it would spill, and I would win. But then I saw something else in the Kappa's eyes. Not just panic, but resignation, acceptance. And I suddenly understood that if I won this way by using its weakness against it, I would be following the letter of honor but violating its spirit. Yes, I would win, but through superior knowledge and trickery rather than true strength. In that moment, I remembered something my sword instructor had once told me. True strength, he had said, is not about defeating your opponent. It is about understanding when to show mercy, when to offer respect even to your enemies. I made a decision. Instead of pulling harder, instead of forcing the water to spill, I released my grip slightly and stepped back, returning to neutral position. The Kappa straightened, its eyes wide with surprise. "Why?" it asked, genuinely confused. "You had me. You could have won." Not honorably," I said, breathing hard from exertion. "To defeat you by making your water spill would be like cutting the tendons of a warrior's sword arm before fighting him. It would be using my knowledge against your nature rather than matching my strength against yours. That is not victory. That is exploitation." The Kappa stared at me for a long moment, and something shifted in its ancient eyes. Slowly, deliberately. It bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in Japanese culture, and when it bowed, the water in the bowl on its head spilled out, pouring onto the stones between us. I watched in shock as the kappa, now weakened, remained in its bow. It had deliberately spilled its own water, making itself vulnerable, because I had shown it honor. You are the first, the kappa said quietly, still bowed, in 200 years of challenging humans, to recognize that true strength is not about victory at any cost. You are the first to show honor even to a creature like me. For that, samurai, I acknowledge defeat, not because you bested me in wrestling, but because you bested me in character. The kappa straightened, and though it moved more slowly now, weakened by the loss of its water, it carried itself with dignity. I will leave this place, as promised. I will return to the deep mountain pools where my kind dwell, and will harm humans no more. But before I go, I wish to give you something from somewhere. I never quite understood where. The kappa produced a small scroll sealed with wax. It handed it to me with both webbed hands. This scroll contains knowledge of water medicine, of herbs and techniques for healing that my kind have known for centuries. Share it with the village healer, with doctors, with anyone who can use it to reduce suffering. It is my gift to you, and through you, to humanity. I accepted the scroll, bowing with the same depth and respect the kappa had shown me. I will do so. Thank you. The kappa smiled, and for the first time, its expression seemed gentle rather than menacing. And I thank you, samurai, for teaching me that honor exists in humans as well as yokai. I had forgotten that truth. You have reminded me. It turned and walked to the deep pool, moving slowly due to its weakened state. At the water's edge, it paused and looked back. If you are ever in desperate need, come to this pool and call my name. I am Kanayoshi. I will help you if I can, for you have shown me mercy and respect, and that creates a debt I would repay. And then it slipped into the water and vanished, leaving only ripples that slowly faded to stillness. I stood there, still breathing hard, still processing what had happened. The villagers rushed forward, celebrating my victory, but I felt no triumph. Instead, I felt humbled. I had learned that true strength was not about defeating opponents, but about maintaining honor, even when it would be easier not to. I had learned that showing mercy to an enemy could transform that enemy into a friend. I gave the scroll to the village healer, as the kappa had asked. The knowledge in it saved many lives over the years, and I carried the lesson of that day with me, kept it close even when I later lost my position, became Ronin, masterless. The war took much from me, but it could not take the understanding that honor, real honor, matters more than victory. Kenji fell silent, his story complete, and for a moment his scarred hands trembled slightly before he steadied them. The room was quiet, the weight of his tale settling over everyone. Finally, Hiroshi spoke, his voice warm with approval. You understood what many warriors never learn. That the greatest victories are not won on the battlefield, but in the heart, in the choices we make when no one would blame us for choosing differently. Yuki nodded. The kappa bowed to you because you bowed to your own better nature first. That is true wisdom. Takeshi smiled. And you gained a friend where you might have made an enemy. Sometimes mercy is the best investment a person can make. Otsuru was looking at Kenji with new respect. You carry your honor still, Kenji-san, even though you are Ronin. That scroll saved lives. Your choice mattered. Young Sato looked troubled, though. But what if the Kappa had not honored its word? What if it had attacked you when you showed mercy? Kenji met the young man's eyes steadily. Then I would have died with my honor intact. Sometimes, Sato-kun, we must trust in the honor of others, even yokai, even those who seem like enemies. If we live always in suspicion, always choosing safety over principle, we lose what makes us human. The fire popped and crackled, and the travelers sat in thoughtful silence, each processing the lessons of the stories they had heard. The night was growing late, the moon rising higher outside, illuminating the snow that blanketed the world in silver light. Otsuru rose slowly, her old bones creaking, and moved to the window, sliding it open just a crack. Cold air flowed in, carrying the scent of fresh snow and pine. "The storm has passed," she said softly. "The morning will be clear. You will be able to continue your journeys." But no one seemed eager to move, to break the spell of the evening. There were still stories to be told, still wisdom to be shared, and the warmth of the fire and the companionship of fellow travelers was too precious to abandon before necessary. Otsuru returned to the hearth and settled herself, and her weathered face was thoughtful, perhaps a touch sad. I have one more story to share," she said quietly. "It is not a light tale like the Tanuki's tricks, nor as dramatic as the Tengu's trials or the Kappa's challenge. It is a gentler story, but perhaps a sadder one. It is about loss and love, about grief and compassion, and about a creature that was neither good nor evil, but simply lonely. It is the story of a Bakaneko, a cat that lived too long and loved too well." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and the others waited patiently, sensing that this story held particular meaning for the old innkeeper. "It happened in my 40th year, Otsuru began, and it taught me that sometimes the supernatural is not strange at all, but heartbreakingly familiar. My husband was still alive then," Otsuru said, her voice soft with memory. "We had been running the Crane's Rest for 20 years, and we were happy. The inn was doing well, travelers were frequent, and we had built a good life together. But there was one thing that troubled us. Our neighbor, an old man named Yoshida-san, who lived in a small cottage just down the path, was dying. Yoshida-san had no family, no children or relatives. He had been a scholar once, a teacher of calligraphy and poetry in the capital, but he had retired to our mountains years ago, seeking peace and solitude. He was a kind man, gentle and thoughtful, and he often visited our inn to share tea and conversation. My husband and I had grown very fond of him, but what made Yoshida-san truly memorable was his cat. Her name was Kuro, which simply means black, for she was entirely black from nose to tail, with only her eyes showing any color. They were green, bright as jade, and remarkably intelligent. Yoshida-san had found her as a kitten, abandoned in the forest, and had raised her with great care and affection. That cat loved him with an intensity I had never seen in an animal. She followed him everywhere, slept on his chest at night, sat on his desk while he practiced calligraphy, would wait by the door when he went out and greet him with enthusiastic meowing when he returned. It was clear that to Kuro, Yoshida-san was not just her owner, but her entire world. As I said, Yoshida-san was dying. The sickness had come slowly, a gradual weakening, a cough that would not leave, a loss of appetite. The village healer could do nothing. It was simply his time, the natural end of a long life. He accepted this with the grace of a scholar and a Buddhist making peace with his mortality. But Kuro did not understand. As Yoshida-san grew weaker, the cat grew more distressed. She would not leave his side, would barely eat, and her meowing became almost human in its grief and worry. It was heartbreaking to see. My husband and I took to visiting Yoshida-san daily, bringing food and company, helping him with small tasks he could no longer manage. Kuro would watch us with those green eyes, and I swear I saw accusation in them, as if she blamed us for not healing her beloved master. One night, Yoshida-san asked us to sit with him. He knew his time was very near. We sat by his bedside, holding his hands, and Kuro lay on his chest, purring softly, even though she must have sensed what was coming. My friends, Yoshida-san said, his voice weak but clear, I have a favor to ask. When I am gone, please take care of Kuro. Find her a good home with someone who will be kind to her. She has been the greatest comfort of my old age, and I do not want her to suffer when I am no longer here. We promised him we would. What else could we do? He smiled, seeming relieved, and then he spoke to his cat. Kuro, my dear friend, he whispered, stroking her black fur with trembling fingers. You have been the best companion an old man could ask for, but you must let me go now. You must accept that all things end, that all meetings lead to parting. Be good for our friends here. Live a happy life, and perhaps we will meet again in some other world. The cat made a sound I had never heard from any animal, a low, keening cry that was almost like a human sob. She pressed her face against Yoshida-san's chest, and we all wept, my husband and I, and the dying man. Yoshida-san passed away that night, peacefully in his sleep, and Kuro, who had never left his side, was there when it happened. When we came the next morning to prepare his body, we found the cat lying on his still chest, not moving, her green eyes open and staring at nothing. For a moment, I thought she had died too, died of grief beside her master. But then she blinked and looked at us, and I saw something in those eyes that made me shiver. Not the simple grief of an animal, but something deeper, more aware, more human. We buried Yoshida-san in the village cemetery with proper ceremony, and we took Kuro back to the inn with us. We made her comfortable, gave her food and water, tried to show her kindness. But the cat would not eat, would not interact with us, would just sit in corners and stare with those increasingly disturbing eyes. Days passed, then a week. Kuro began to change. Her black fur, which had been glossy and beautiful, took on a strange quality, as if it absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Her tail grew longer, and sometimes when I looked at her in dim light, it seemed to split, showing the beginning of a second tail. Her eyes grew larger, more luminous, and when she looked at you, it felt like being seen by something far more than a simple cat. I realized with growing horror what was happening. Kuro had lived a long life, at least 15 years, maybe more, and she had loved with an intensity that cats rarely show. And now, grief-stricken, refusing to accept her master's death, she was transforming into a Bakaneko, a supernatural cat, a yokai. The stories said that cats who lived past a certain age, especially cats who were treated with great affection, could develop supernatural powers. They could speak human language, walk on hind legs, and in the darkest tales they could consume their owners and take their place, wearing human form as a disguise. But I did not believe Kuro had any malicious intent. Her transformation seemed driven by grief, not evil. Strange things began happening in the inn. Guests would report seeing a woman in a black kimono walking the halls at night. But when we investigated, no one was there. Objects would move on their own. Shadows in corners seemed deeper, more present than they should be. And sometimes, late at night, I would hear someone weeping, a woman's voice soft and full of inconsolable sorrow. One night, unable to sleep, I went down to the main room and found Kuro sitting by the hearth. But she was not sitting like a cat. She was sitting upright, almost human in posture, and she was staring into the flames with an expression of such profound sadness that it broke my heart. "Ah, Kuro," I said softly, not knowing if she would understand, if she could respond. She turned to look at me, and when she spoke her voice was rough, unused, but undeniably human. "He is gone," she said simply. "My master is gone, and I do not know how to be without him." I sat down near her, careful not to come too close, not knowing what she was capable of in this transformed state. "I know," I said gently, "death takes those we love. It is the hardest truth of life." I am not alive, not truly," Kuro said, still staring at the fire. "I am something else now, caught between cat and yokai, between life and death. I cannot let go of him, but I cannot follow him either. I am trapped in this grief, and it is changing me into something I do not wish to be." "What do you wish to be?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "I wish to be nothing. I wish to fade away, to cease existing, because existence without him is unbearable. But I cannot die. I am already more than alive, and death will not take me now." I understood then Kuro was not dangerous, not malevolent. She was simply a creature in terrible pain, transformed by love and loss into something that should not exist, trapped in her grief with no way out. "There might be a way," I said slowly, an idea forming. "Not death, but peace, release. Would you like me to try?" Her green eyes fixed on me with desperate hope. "Please, if you can end this suffering, I would be grateful beyond measure." The next day, I went to the village shrine and spoke with the priest. I told him everything about Kuro's transformation, about her grief, about her pain. He listened without judgment and nodded slowly. "Bakaneko are not evil by nature," he said. They are simply cats who have accumulated too much power through long life and strong emotion. But they can be helped. There is a ritual, a purification that can release her spirit, allow her to move on to whatever comes next. He came to the inn that evening bringing sacred items of wood, prayer papers, salt, blessed water, and a small shrine bell. We prepared a space in the main room, and I went to find Kuro. She was in Yoshida-san's old cottage, which we had not yet cleared. She was lying on his bed, curled on the pillow where his head had rested, and she looked so small and pitiful that I almost wept. "Ah, Kuro," I said gently, "the priest is here. He can help you. But you must want to be helped, must be willing to let go of your master, to accept that he is gone." The cat, the Bakaneko, looked at me with those two human eyes. "I am afraid," she said in that rough voice. "What if there is nothing after? What if letting go means I forget him, and all our years together vanish as if they never were?" "Love does not vanish," I said, speaking from my heart. "The love you shared with Yoshida-san, it exists, it is real, it happened. Even if you let go of your grief, that love remains. It is part of the fabric of the world now. You do not need to hold on to sorrow to preserve love." Kuro was silent, and then she rose, moving with the grace of a cat, but the purpose of a human. "I will try," she said quietly. We returned to the inn, where the priest had prepared his ritual space. He instructed Kuro to sit in the center, which she did, still in that upright human-like posture. My husband and I sat nearby, witnesses and supporters. The priest began to chant, his voice deep and resonant, speaking words in Sanskrit that I did not understand but felt in my bones. He rang the bell, a clear, pure tone that seemed to cut through the darkness. He laid out the ofuda papers in a circle around Kuro, creating a sacred boundary. He sprinkled salt and blessed water, purifying the space. As he worked, I watched Kuro. Her form began to shimmer, to waver, as if she could not decide what shape to hold. Sometimes she looked like a simple cat, sometimes like a woman in black robes, sometimes like something in between, fluid and undefined. The priest's chanting grew more intense, and he placed one hand on Kuro's head, speaking directly to her spirit. You have loved well," he said, his normal speaking voice gentle beneath the formal ritual words. "You have been loved in return. That is a blessing many never receive. But love does not require you to suffer endlessly. Let go of your pain. Let go of your need to hold on to what is past. Trust that your master is at peace, and allow yourself to be at peace as well." Kuro made that keening sound again, that almost human sob, and tears rolled down her feline face, impossible and heartbreaking. "I do not know how to let go," she whispered. You do," the priest said gently. "You are already doing it. Every tear you shed releases a piece of your grief. Cry, dear one. Weep for what you have lost, and then release it. Allow yourself to transform once more, not into a yokai driven by sorrow, but back into the simple, beloved cat you once were. Return to peace." And Kuro wept. She wept as I had never seen any creature weep, human or animal. She wept for her master, for the years they shared, for the loneliness of his cottage, for the moments she would never have again. She wept for herself, for the strange thing she had become, for the fear and confusion of her transformation. And as she wept, her form began to stabilize. The shimmer faded, the wavering stilled. The unnatural aspects of her appearance diminished. Her tail shortened back to normal. Her eyes, though still bright with tears, became more cat-like, less disturbing. Her posture relaxed, and she sank down into a normal sitting position. The priest continued his chanting, guiding her transformation with his words and his will, helping her return to what she had been. The bell rang again, clear and final, and there was a sense of completion, of something settling into place. When the ritual ended, Kuro lay curled on the floor, looking like nothing more than an exhausted, grieving cat. But the terrible awareness, the painful transformation, had been undone. She was simply a cat again, old and tired and sad, but no longer trapped between worlds. The priest bowed to her with respect. "You are released," he said simply. "Live out your days in peace. When your time comes naturally, you will go gently, and perhaps you will find your master waiting for you wherever spirits go." Kuro mewed softly, a normal cat sound, and I took her in my arms. She nuzzled against me, accepting comfort, and I felt her purr, small and fragile. She lived with us at the inn for another year. She never transformed again, never showed supernatural abilities, never spoke with human voice. She was simply a cat, elderly and gentle, who slept by the fire and accepted our affection with quiet gratitude. And when she died, peacefully in her sleep one winter morning, we buried her near Yoshida-san's grave with a small marker stone. But here's the strange thing. On the night she died, I dreamed of Yoshida-san. He was young and healthy, walking in a beautiful garden, and beside him walked a young, vibrant black cat with bright green eyes. They were together again, and both were happy. I like to think it was real, that the priest was right, that love does not end with death but continues in ways we cannot fully understand. Otsuru's voice had grown thick with emotion, and she wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. The room was very quiet, the fire burning low. Finally Yuki spoke, her voice gentle. "That was a story of great compassion, Otsuru-san. You helped her when she needed it most." Hiroshi nodded. The priest understood that not all yokai need to be destroyed or driven away. Some simply need help, guidance, release from their suffering. Takeshi looked thoughtful. "Grief is powerful enough to transform us, to make us into things we are not. Perhaps all yokai are simply beings transformed by strong emotion, by love or hate or loneliness carried too far." Kenji, surprising everyone, spoke softly. "She was loyal until the end and beyond. That is a kind of honor too, to love so completely that even death cannot immediately break the bond. That is both tragic and beautiful." Young Sato had tears streaming down his cheeks, which he wiped away quickly, embarrassed. "I am glad she found peace," he said simply. I am glad she was reunited with him, even if only in dreams." Otsuru smiled through her own tears. "As am I, Sato-kun. As am I." The fire had burned down to embers, glowing red and orange in the hearth. Outside, the night was deep and still, the stars bright in the clear sky now that the storm had passed. The travelers sat in contemplative silence, each processing the weight of the stories they had heard. These were not just tales to frighten or entertain, they were lessons. Wisdom passed down through generations, reminders of how to live, how to treat others, how to understand the world's mysteries. They were bridges between the human and supernatural, showing that the yokai were not simply monsters to be feared, but reflections of nature, of emotion, of life itself. The night was not over yet. There were still stories to tell, still wisdom to share before the morning came, and the travelers continued their separate journeys. The crane's rest had become, for this one night, a sacred space where stories kept the spirits alive and taught the living how to be more fully human. The fire had burned low, and Otsuru rose to add more wood, building up the flames once more. The renewed light danced across the faces of the travelers, and there was a sense that the night was moving toward its conclusion, that the stories were reaching their natural end. Takeshi had been quiet since Otsuru's tale of the Bakaneko, his expression thoughtful. Now he stirred, looking around the circle with a slight smile. "I have another story," he said, though this one was not my own experience. "It was told to me by a young merchant I met on the road 3 years ago, a fellow named Hideo. He had survived an encounter with one of the more dangerous yokai, and his tale stayed with me because it showed that even the most fearsome spirits can appreciate beauty and art. It is the story of the Joragumo, the Spider Woman, and how music and poetry saved a life." The others settled in to listen, and Takeshi's voice took on the cadence of a storyteller, relating another's experience as if it were his own memory. Hideo was 22 when this happened, young and eager to make his fortune as a traveling merchant. He dealt in fine goods, silk cloth, lacquerware, and other luxuries that appealed to wealthy customers. He was traveling through a mountainous region, taking what he thought was a shortcut through a dense forest to reach the next town before nightfall. But the path was worse than he expected, overgrown and poorly maintained, and as evening approached, he realized he would not reach the town in time. The forest grew dark early, the thick canopy blocking out the fading sunlight, and he began to look for shelter for the night. That was when he saw it, through the trees, an old temple, or what had once been a temple, now clearly abandoned. The torii gate at the entrance was weathered and leaning, and the main building showed signs of long neglect, with missing roof tiles and overgrown gardens. But it was shelter, and shelter was what he needed. Hideo approached cautiously, calling out to see if anyone was there, if perhaps a monk or hermit still maintained the place. No answer came. Only the echo of his own voice. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, which creaked loudly on rusted hinges, and stepped inside. The interior was dim, dusty, and filled with the smell of age and abandonment. But it was dry, and offered protection from the night creatures, so he decided to stay. He found the main hall, where once worshippers had gathered, and cleared a space near what had been the altar. From his pack, he took out a small oil lamp, lit it, and prepared a simple meal of rice balls and dried fish. As he ate, he looked around the abandoned temple. Despite its decay, there was a melancholy beauty to it. Faded paintings on the walls showed scenes from Buddhist teachings. Stone statues of guardian deities stood watch, though many were cracked or missing pieces. And everywhere, in every corner, hung spider webs, thick and elaborate, some spanning entire sections of the ceiling. Hideo had never seen so many spider webs in one place. They were works of art, really, intricate and geometric, catching the lamplight and glittering like strands of silver. He found himself admiring them, even as he carefully avoided disturbing them. After his meal, feeling somewhat lonely in the silent temple, he took out his shakuhachi, a bamboo flute he always carried. Hideo was no master musician, but he played well enough to entertain himself, and music made the empty spaces feel less empty. He began to play, a simple melody, sad and sweet, that seemed fitting for an abandoned temple. The notes echoed through the empty hall, pure and clear, and Hideo lost himself in the music. He played one song, then another, then a third, letting his fingers find their own way across the holes of the flute. He did not notice at first that he was no longer alone. When he finally lowered his flute and opened his eyes, he saw her. A woman stood at the far end of the hall near the entrance to what had once been the inner sanctum. She was beautiful, extraordinarily so, dressed in an elaborate kimono of deep purple silk patterned with silver webs. Her hair was long and black, arranged in a complex style that suggested nobility, or perhaps a courtesan's artistry. Her face was pale and perfect, and her eyes were dark and deep. But there was something wrong, something that made Hideo's skin prickle with warning, even as he found himself captivated by her beauty. She moved too smoothly, too fluidly, as if gliding rather than walking. Her fingers were too long, too delicate, and when the lamplight caught her eyes at certain angles, they reflected light like an animal's eyes, showing colors that human eyes should not show. "Please," she said, and her voice was like silk sliding over skin, "do not stop playing. Your music is beautiful, and I have not heard such sounds in this place for many, many years." Hideo should have run. Every instinct screamed that this woman was not human, that she was dangerous. But there was something mesmerizing about her, something that held him in place. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice steady despite his fear. I am the guardian of this temple," she said, smiling slightly. "Or I was long ago. Now I am simply one who dwells here, in the darkness and the webs, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Hideo asked. Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too white, too sharp. "For travelers who wander into my home, for company, for sustenance." And then Hideo saw and understood. Behind the woman, in the shadows of the inner sanctum, were bundles, large bundles wrapped in silk, that was not cloth, but web, spider web. And within those bundles he could make out shapes, human shapes, bodies dried and preserved, wrapped in silk like offerings or trophies. The woman was a Jorogumo, a spider yokai that took human form to lure victims. The stories said they were among the most dangerous of yokai, beautiful and deadly, using their webs and their beauty to trap the unwary. Once caught in a Jorogumo's web, escape was nearly impossible, and the victim would be drained of blood or consumed alive. Hideo's blood turned to ice. He was trapped in an abandoned temple with a creature that had clearly killed many times before. The door was far behind the Jorogumo, and he doubted he could reach it before she caught him. And even if he did, those webs throughout the temple probably served as alarms, alerting her to any movement. But then he remembered something his grandmother had told him. A piece of folklore he had thought was merely a story. Some yokai, particularly the older and more powerful ones, had once been something else. The Yoroguma were said to have been ordinary spiders who lived for centuries, accumulating wisdom and power. And with that wisdom came appreciation for beauty, for art, for the finer things that separated the civilized from the savage. You said my music was beautiful, Hideo said carefully, trying to keep his voice from shaking. Would you like to hear more? The Jorogumo tilted her head, her expression curious. I would. It has been so long since anyone played music in this place. The monks are gone, the worshippers are gone, only I remain. And I am tired of silence. Hideo lifted his flute to his lips, and he played. But this time, he did not play simple melodies. He played with all his skill, with all his heart, pouring everything he had into the music. He played songs his mother had taught him, songs he had learned from street musicians, songs he had composed himself in lonely moments on the road. He played as if his life depended on it, because it did. The Jorogumo stood perfectly still, listening, and slowly her expression changed. The predatory hunger faded, replaced by something gentler, something almost sad. When Hideo paused to catch his breath, she spoke softly. I remember, she said, when this temple was alive with such sounds. The monks chanted sutras, visitors sang hymns, children laughed in the gardens. I was content then, living in my web in the rafters, listening, learning. I did not need to hunt humans then. I lived on insects and small creatures, and I was happy simply to exist in a place of beauty and devotion. What happened? Hideo asked, genuinely curious now, despite his fear. The wars came, the Jorogumo said, her voice distant with memory. The lords fought, villages burned, people fled. The monks abandoned this temple, seeking safety elsewhere. The worshippers stopped coming, and I was alone, so alone. Centuries of accumulated wisdom, appreciation for beauty, understanding of human art and culture, and no one to share it with. I grew angry, bitter. When travelers stumbled upon this place, I did not spare them. I took my loneliness out on them, consumed them, adding their lives to my own. She looked at the bundles in the shadows, and for the first time, Hideo saw genuine regret in her expression. But their lives brought me no joy, she continued. Each one I took only deepened my isolation, made me more monstrous, more alone. I became the very thing I had sworn never to be when I first gained awareness. A beast, a demon. I forgot what it meant to appreciate beauty. Hideo lowered his flute, an idea forming. It was risky, perhaps foolish, but it was his only chance. I am also a poet, he said quietly. Not a great one, but I know some verses. Would you like to hear poetry as well as music? The Jorogumo's eyes widened slightly, and something flickered in them. Hope, longing. Yes, she breathed. Oh yes, I have not heard poetry in 100 years. So Hideo recited. He recited the classical poems he had memorized in his youth, verses about cherry blossoms and falling leaves, about the passage of seasons and the sadness of partings. He recited poems about loneliness and beauty, about temples and nature, about the ache of existence. And as he recited, something remarkable happened. The Shorogumo began to weep. Tears rolled down her perfect and human face, and she made no effort to wipe them away. She simply stood there, listening, weeping, as if something frozen inside her was finally melting. When Hideo finished the last poem, there was a long silence. The Jorogumo looked at him with those strange, beautiful eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was different, softer, more human. "Oh, you have given me a gift tonight," she said. "You have reminded me of what I lost, what I became, and what I could be again. For that, I will not harm you. You may leave when morning comes, unharmed and safe." "Thank you," Hideo said, barely believing his luck. But the Jorogumo held up one long-fingered hand. "Wait, I wish to give you something in return, a gift for the gift you have given me." She moved to the inner sanctum, and Hideo heard the sound of something being moved, of silk being unwrapped. She returned carrying a small box, lacquered and beautiful, clearly very old. "Ah, this box contains silk thread," she said, placing it in his hands. "But it is no ordinary thread. It is thread I have spun myself, imbued with my power. It will never break, never fray, never wear out. Cloth made from it will last forever, will be more beautiful than any silk in the world. Sell it, make your fortune, but use that fortune wisely. Do not become a monster of greed as I became a monster of loneliness." Hideo accepted the box with trembling hands, bowing deeply. "I will use it wisely, I promise." "Ah, and one more thing," the Jorogumo said, her voice very soft now. "If you ever pass this way again, if you remember this night, would you stop and play your flute for me once more? I will not harm you, or any who come with you. I would simply like to hear music again, to remember what it means to appreciate beauty rather than destroy it." "Ah, I will," Hideo promised. "I swear it." He spent the rest of the night in the temple, but he did not sleep. He played his flute softly and recited more poetry, and the Jorogumo listened from the shadows, no longer menacing but simply present, a lonely spirit finding comfort in art. When dawn came, Hideo packed his things and prepared to leave. The Jorogumo appeared one last time in the doorway, and in the morning light she looked different. Still beautiful, still inhuman, but somehow less monstrous. More sad. "Asking to thank you," she said simply. for seeing me as more than a demon, for remembering that even monsters can appreciate beauty, can hunger for connection rather than just for blood. Hideo bowed to her respectfully and left the abandoned temple. He sold the silk thread she had given him, just a small amount of it, and it fetched such a price that he became wealthy almost overnight. He used that wealth to expand his business, but also to support artists and musicians to commission poetry and music to bring beauty into the world. And true to his word, every year he returned to the abandoned temple and played his flute for the Jorogumo. Sometimes he brought other musicians with him, other poets. The Jorogumo never appeared to them, but she listened from the shadows, and the webs in the temple began to form patterns, beautiful geometric designs that seemed to dance with the music. Hideo told me, Takeshi said, bringing the story back to himself, that on his 10th visit he found the temple had changed. The webs were still there, still beautiful, but the bundles were gone. The Jorogumo had released the remains of her victims, giving them proper cremation and burial. She was healing, he said, slowly becoming less of a monster and more of a guardian spirit again, protecting the temple rather than using it as a hunting ground. Takeshi fell silent, and the room was quiet for a moment. Yuki was the first to speak. That is a powerful story. It shows that even the most dangerous yokai can change if shown compassion and reminded of their better nature. Hiroshi nodded thoughtfully. Art and beauty have power to transform both the one who creates and the one who appreciates. Music and poetry reached her when nothing else could. Kenji looked impressed. That young merchant was braver than most warriors. To stay in that temple, to play music for a creature that could have killed him at any moment, that took courage. Atsuru smiled. And wisdom. He understood that the Jorogumo was not just a monster, but a being capable of change, capable of redemption. His compassion saved his life and perhaps saved her soul. Young Sato looked troubled. But what about the people she killed before? The ones in the webs? Is it enough to just change after doing such terrible things? It was Hiroshi who answered, his voice gentle. Redemption does not erase the past, Sato-kun. The harm done remains. But the choice to change, to stop causing harm, to try to become better, that matters. We cannot undo what has been done, but we can choose a different path forward. That is all any of us can do, human or yokai. The wisdom of his words settled over the room, and everyone fell into thoughtful silence. The fire crackled softly, and outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky, though full morning was still hours away. Atsuru looked at Yuki, the young shrine maiden who had been quiet since her earlier story. Yuki-san, you have one more tale for us, do you not? You mentioned earlier that you knew many stories from your work at the shrine. Yuki nodded slowly, her expression serene but touched with something deeper. I do have one more story, if everyone would like to hear it. It is a legend from the shrine where I serve, a tale of an oni, a demon, and a lost child. It is about how even the most fearsome creatures can be changed by innocence, and how sometimes the greatest transformations come from the smallest actions. The others murmured their interest, settling in for one more tale before the night ended and morning arrived. Yuki took a moment to gather her thoughts, her hands folded in her lap, and when she began to speak, her voice carried the weight of sacred legend. This happened long ago, in the time of our great-grandfathers' great-grandfathers, when the mountains were wilder and the spirits walked more openly among humans. There was a village, Yuki began, nestled in a valley surrounded by steep mountains. The people there lived simple lives, farming their rice fields, raising their children, honoring their ancestors. But above the village, in the highest peaks where snow never fully melted, there lived an Oni. Now, Oni are perhaps the most fearsome of all yokai. They are demons, ogres, beings of terrible power and rage. They stand tall as trees, with skin of red or blue, horns growing from their heads, and tusks like a wild boar. They carry great clubs made of iron, and their strength is such that they can split mountains and divert rivers. The tales say they devour humans, destroy villages, and delight in chaos and suffering. This particular Oni had terrorized the valley for decades. He would come down from the mountain during storms when thunder covered the sound of his approach, and he would steal livestock, destroy crops, sometimes even carry off people who wandered too far from the village at night. The villagers lived in constant fear, making offerings at the shrines, praying to the gods for protection. But nothing seemed to appease the Oni's rage. Many warriors came to try to slay the demon, brave samurai seeking glory, monks with sacred sutras, hunters with blessed arrows. None succeeded. The Oni was too strong, too cunning. Those who challenged him were never seen again, and the villagers learned to simply accept his presence as one might accept a natural disaster, something terrible but unavoidable. Then one autumn, a child went missing from the village. A little girl of perhaps 5 years, the daughter of a farmer. Her name was Hana, which means flower, and she was known in the village for her sweetness and her strange fearlessness. While other children would not go near the forest, Hana loved to explore, to pick wildflowers, to talk to animals as if they could understand her. She had wandered into the forest one afternoon following a deer or a butterfly, something beautiful that caught her attention. The villagers searched frantically when they realized she was gone, calling her name, scouring the forest paths. But night fell, and they were forced to return to the village, knowing that a small child alone in the mountains at night had little chance of survival. The cold alone would kill her, not to mention the wolves and bears and other dangers. Hannah's mother wept through the night, and her father stood at the edge of the village staring up at the dark mountains, helpless and despairing. But Hannah did not die that night, and what happened to her became the stuff of legend. Lost in the forest as darkness fell, Hannah had indeed been frightened at first. She called for her parents, but her voice was swallowed by the vast forest. She tried to find her way back, but only became more lost. And as night deepened and the cold grew more intense, she began to cry. Small, frightened sobs that no one heard. She stumbled through the darkness, barely able to see, until she found herself in a clearing. And in that clearing stood a cave, dark and forbidding, carved into the mountainside. Hannah knew she should not enter strange caves, but she was so cold, so tired, so scared, and the cave promised shelter from the wind. She crept inside, feeling her way along the rough stone walls, and found that the cave went deep into the mountain. But there was a faint glow coming from somewhere within, a reddish light like a fire, and she followed it, desperate for warmth. The cave opened into a large chamber, and there, sitting beside a fire built in a stone pit, was the Oni. He was enormous, twice the height of any man, with skin the color of fresh blood. 2 white horns curved from his forehead, and his tusks gleamed in the firelight. He wore rough furs and carried an iron club as thick as a tree trunk. His eyes glowed with an inner fire, and when he saw Hannah stumbling into his chamber, those eyes widened in surprise. For a long moment, they stared at each other. The Oni, who had terrorized the valley for decades, who had destroyed warriors and devoured livestock, and the tiny child, exhausted and cold and lost. Hannah should have screamed, should have run, should have been terrified beyond reason. But she was 5 years old, and the world of a 5-year-old child operates by different rules than the world of adults. What she saw was not a demon, but a being sitting by a warm fire, and she was so very cold. "Ah, please," she said, her voice small but clear. "May I sit by your fire? I am lost and cold." The Oni made a sound like rumbling thunder, and Hannah realized it was laughter, but not cruel laughter. Surprised laughter. "You are not afraid of me, little human?" he asked, his voice deep as an earthquake. "Ah, should I be?" Hannah asked, tilting her head. "You have a fire, and you have not hurt me yet. May I sit?" The Oni, who had never in his long existence been asked politely for anything, who had only known fear and hatred from humans, gestured to a spot near the fire. "Sit, little one. Warm yourself." Hannah settled by the fire with a sigh of relief, holding her small hands out to the flames. She was silent for a few moments, simply enjoying the warmth, and the Oni watched her with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "What is your name, little human?" he finally asked. "Hannah," she replied. "What is yours?" The Oni was taken aback. No one had asked his name in centuries. "I am called Akuma," he said, using the word for demon, for that was what humans called him. "That is a sad name," Hannah said matter-of-factly. "It means demon. Do you not have a real name?" The Oni was quiet for a long moment. "I did once, long ago. I was called Goru." "Ah, Goru is a better name," Hannah said, nodding. "I will call you that." And so she did. She sat by Goru's fire and talked to him as if he were not a demon, but simply another person. She told him about her village, about her parents, about the games she played with other children. She asked him questions about his cave, about the mountains, about how old he was. And Goru, who had spent decades alone in his rage and hatred, who had known only conflict and violence with humans, found himself answering her questions. found himself enjoying her company. She was innocent, unafraid, treating him with a casual friendliness that he had forgotten could exist. When Hana began to yawn, Goru brought out furs and made a nest near the fire. "Sleep, little one," he said. "In the morning, I will take you back to your village." "Thank you, Goru," Hana said sleepily. And then, before drifting off, she added, "You are very kind, even though you are big and have horns. I like you." Those simple words struck Goru like a physical blow. Kind. She called him kind. When was the last time anyone had said such a thing to him? When had he last been anything other than terrible and feared? He sat by the fire long into the night, watching the small child sleep peacefully in his cave, and he remembered things he had thought long forgotten. He had not always been an Oni. He had been human once, long ago, so long that the memory was like a dream. He had been a warrior who fell in battle, died with rage and hatred in his heart, and that rage had transformed him, made him into this monstrous form. For centuries, he had lived in that rage, feeding it, nurturing it, taking vengeance on a world that had forgotten him. But this child, this innocent little creature, saw none of that. She saw only a being who offered warmth and shelter. She called him kind and said she liked him. And something in that simple acceptance cracked the armor of rage he had built around himself. When morning came, Goru woke Hana gently. She stretched and yawned, smiled up at him without fear. "Are you hungry?" he asked, and she nodded. From his supplies, he gave her rice balls and dried fruit, food he had taken from village stores but never actually eaten, for Oni did not need human food. He had taken such things simply to cause suffering, to be destructive, but now he gave them to a child who thanked him sweetly and ate with obvious pleasure. After she ate, Goru picked her up, placing her on his massive shoulder, and he carried her down the mountain toward her village. As they descended, Hana chattered happily, pointing out birds and flowers, telling him more stories, treating this as a wonderful adventure rather than a rescue from danger. When they reached the edge of the village, Goru set her down carefully. He could see villagers in the distance, hear them calling Hana's name, still searching for her. "You should go now," Goru said quietly. "Your parents are looking for you." "Will I see you again?" Hana asked, looking up at him with clear, trusting eyes. Goru did not know how to answer. He was the demon who had terrorized this village for decades. If they saw him with their child, they would attack him, try to kill him even though he now held no wish to harm them. "I do not know, little one," he said honestly. Hana reached out and patted his massive hand with her tiny one. "Thank you for keeping me warm and safe, Goru. You are a good friend." And then she ran toward the village, calling for her mother, leaving the Oni standing at the forest's edge. The villagers found Hana and rejoiced. They asked where she had been, what had happened, but Hana, with the wisdom that sometimes comes to children, simply said she had found shelter in a cave and stayed warm by a fire. She did not mention the Oni. Something told her that adults would not understand, would not believe that the demon who terrorized them had shown her kindness. But from that day forward, something changed in the valley. The Oni no longer came down from the mountain to cause destruction. The attacks stopped. Livestock were safe. Crops grew undisturbed, and no one else disappeared. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering if the demon had moved on, or died, or been driven away by their prayers. Only Hannah knew the truth. Sometimes, when she was alone in the forest, picking flowers or playing by the stream, she would see a massive figure watching from the shadows of the trees, red skin, white horns, glowing eyes, and she would wave cheerfully, and the figure would raise one huge hand in return before disappearing back into the forest. Years passed. Hannah grew into a young woman, and the valley prospered in the absence of the Oni's attacks. The village expanded, built new houses, and people began to forget their fear of the demon. Then one year, a warlord came to the valley with his army. He wanted to claim the fertile land for himself, to drive out the villagers and take their crops for his war effort. He set up camp at the edge of the valley and sent ultimatums: leave or be killed. The villagers had no warriors, no way to defend themselves. They prepared to flee, to abandon the homes they had built over generations. The night before they planned to leave, Hannah walked into the forest one last time. She climbed high up the mountain to the clearing she remembered, to the cave where she had once found shelter. Goru, she called into the darkness. If you can hear me, if you remember me, I need your help. We all do. And from the cave emerged the Oni, barely changed from that night 20 years before, though perhaps his eyes were gentler, less filled with rage. Little Hannah, he said, and his voice held warmth. You have grown. And you have not terrorized my village since the night you saved me, she said. Why? Goru was quiet for a moment. You called me kind, he said finally. You said you liked me. No one had ever said such things to me, not in all my long existence. And I realized that I had become what everyone believed me to be, a demon, a destroyer. But you saw something else, something I had forgotten existed within me. I could not go back to being a monster after that. You changed me, little one, with your innocent trust. Then I ask you now, Hannah said, help us. A warlord threatens our village. We have no one to defend us. Will you be our protector instead of our tormentor? Goru looked down at her, this woman who had once been a lost child, who had seen past his monstrous form to whatever humanity remained in him. I will, he said simply. That night, as the warlord's army slept in their camp, Goru descended from the mountain. But he did not attack the soldiers, did not kill or destroy. Instead, he stood at the edge of their camp, massive and terrible in the moonlight, and he roared. The sound shook the valley, sent rocks tumbling from cliffs, terrified horses into stampeding. The soldiers woke to see an Oni, a true demon, standing before them, his eyes glowing with power, his iron club raised, and Goru spoke, his voice carrying across the valley. This village is under my protection. Leave now or face my wrath. I am Goru, guardian of this valley, and I will not allow harm to come to these people. The warlord, for all his military might, was not foolish enough to fight a demon. His army packed up and left that very night, fleeing in terror, and they never returned. The villagers woke to find the army gone, and Goru standing at the edge of their village. They were terrified at first, remembering decades of fear, but Hana walked out to meet him, unafraid, and she bowed deeply. "Thank you, Goru," she said. "You have saved us all." And Goru bowed in return, a demon showing respect to a human woman who had once been a child who called him kind. From that day forward, Goru became the true guardian of the valley. He lived in his mountain cave, but he protected the village from bandits, wild animals, and natural disasters. When avalanches threatened, he would divert them. When fires broke out, he would help contain them. And the villagers, once they understood, built a small shrine at the base of the mountain, leaving offerings for the Oni who had become their protector. Hana lived a long life, married and had children, and on her deathbed, very old and surrounded by grandchildren, she asked to be carried one last time to the mountain cave. Goru came down to meet her, and he knelt beside her, this massive demon grieving for a human friend. You changed my fate," he told her, his voice rough with emotion. "You reminded me that what we are is not fixed, that even demons can choose to be more. Thank you, little Hana. And you taught me," she said softly, "that appearances deceive, that kindness can exist anywhere, even in the most unlikely forms. Thank you, Goru." She died peacefully that night, and Goru carried her body back to the village himself, delivering her gently to her family. And then he returned to his mountain, where he continues to watch over the valley to this day. Or so the legend says. Yuki finished her story and looked around at the circle of listeners, her expression serene but touched with emotion. The room was utterly silent. Finally, Sato spoke, his voice thick with tears he did not bother to hide. "That is the most beautiful story I have ever heard," he said. "That a demon could change, could become good, because one child was not afraid." Takeshi nodded slowly. "Innocence has power that we adults forget. Children see the world without the prejudices we accumulate. They judge beings by actions, not by appearance or reputation." Hiroshi's eyes were closed, and he was smiling. Buddha nature exists in all beings, even demons. Sometimes it just needs to be awakened by compassion and trust. Kenji looked deeply moved. She gave him back his name, his identity beyond a demon. That was a gift greater than any weapon or magic. Otsuru was wiping tears from her weathered face. "This is why I love yokai stories," she said softly. "They teach us that change is always possible, that redemption is always within reach, that the connections between beings matter more than the categories we put them in." The fire had burned down again to embers, and through the windows, the sky was definitely lightening now. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it the end of this night of stories, the end of this gathering of travelers who had become, for a few hours, something like a family. The storm had passed completely. The world outside was still and silent, blanketed in fresh snow that would gleam in the morning light. Soon the travelers would need to continue their journeys, returning to their separate lives, their separate paths. But not quite yet. There was still a little time left before dawn fully arrived. Time for final reflections, for last words, for the gentle closing of a night that none of them would forget. Otsuru looked around at the gathered faces, each one marked by the stories they had shared and heard, and she smiled with deep satisfaction. "My friends," she said quietly, "the night is ending, and with dawn comes the time for partings. But before we sleep, before we face the new day, let us sit together just a little longer and speak of what these stories have taught us, what wisdom we carry forward from this night of yokai and spirits in the thin places between worlds." The travelers sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, each contemplating the night that had passed, the stories that had been shared, the lessons that had been offered. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, but their warmth lingered, and no one felt any desire to move, to break the spell of companionship and shared wisdom. It was Hiroshi who spoke first, his voice soft but clear in the pre-dawn quiet. "Tonight has reminded me why stories matter," he said. "Each tale we have heard has been more than entertainment. They are teachings passed down through generations, holding truths about how to live, how to treat others, how to understand the mysteries that surround us." Yuki nodded, pulling her red and white robes closer around herself. "The yokai are not separate from us. They are reflections of nature, of human emotion, of the forces that shape our world. To understand them is to understand ourselves." Each story showed a different kind of wisdom, Takeshi observed, counting on his fingers. "The kitsune taught me about the true value of what we possess, that wealth means nothing if we lose ourselves in pursuit of it. The Jorogumo showed that even the most dangerous beings can be reached through beauty and art, that compassion can transform monsters into something gentler." Kenji stirred, his scarred hands resting on his knees. "The Kappa taught me about honor, that true strength comes not from defeating opponents, but from maintaining our principles even when it would be easier not to. And the Uni, from Yuki's tale, demonstrated that redemption is always possible, that what we are is not fixed but can be changed by simple acts of kindness." Young Sato had been listening intently, his young face serious in the dim light. "The Yuki Onna story about Yuki-san's grandmother, that one struck me most deeply. It showed that love can exist anywhere, between any beings, and that mercy creates bonds that last beyond death." Otsuru smiled at each of them in turn, her weathered face filled with warmth. "And the Tanuki taught us not to take life too seriously, to remember joy and laughter, while the Bakeneko showed us that grief, though painful, can be released, that we do not need to become monsters of our sorrow." "All of these lessons," Hiroshi said, "circle back to the Buddha's teachings, though they come from Shinto tradition and folk wisdom. Impermanence, interconnection, compassion, the middle way between extremes. The yokai stories teach what formal religion sometimes struggles to convey. They make wisdom accessible, memorable, human, or perhaps more than human," Yuki suggested gently. "The yokai exist in the spaces between, in the margins of understanding. They remind us that the world is larger than we know, stranger than we imagine, more wonderful and terrible than our comfortable beliefs allow." Takeshi leaned forward, his merchant's mind working through the implications. "These stories also teach practical wisdom. The kitsune warns against deals that seem too good to be true. The kappa reminds us to show respect even to those we see as enemies. The shorogumo shows that beauty and art can save us when force cannot. These are lessons that apply to everyday life, not just to encounters with the supernatural. And they teach us to be cautious but not cruel," Kenji added, "to be respectful of forces we do not understand, to approach the unknown with humility rather than arrogance. My encounter with the kappa might have ended very differently if I had simply tried to kill it without honor." Sato looked around at the others, these travelers who had become teachers through their stories. "But how do we know when we are dealing with yokai? How do we recognize them in our lives?" It was Otsuru who answered, her voice taking on the tone of an elder passing down essential knowledge. "Sometimes we do encounter actual yokai, actual spirits, as in the stories we have shared. Those moments are rare, but real. The world is older and stranger than most people believe, and there are indeed beings that walk the margins, that exist in the shadows and the wild places. But more often, the yokai we face are metaphorical. The kitsune represents temptation, the easy path that leads to ruin. The tengu represents our own pride, the arrogance that separates us from others and from enlightenment. The bakaneko represents grief that transforms us into something we should not be. The oni represents rage and hatred that consume us if we let them. When you face a difficult choice, when you are tempted by something that seems too good to be true, remember the kitsune and ask yourself what you might lose in the bargain. When you feel pride swelling within you, remember the tengu and choose humility instead. When grief threatens to overwhelm you, remember the bakaneko and seek help, seek release. When rage fills your heart, remember the oni and how a child's kindness transformed a demon. Her words settled over the room like a blessing, and everyone sat with them, absorbing their truth. The window showed the definite lightening of dawn now. The darkness was giving way to gray, and soon the sun would rise, painting the snow-covered world in gold and pink. Hiroshi rose slowly, his old bones creaking, and moved to the window. He slid it open, letting in a rush of cold, clean air that smelled of snow and pine and new beginnings. "The storm has passed," he said, looking out at the transformed landscape. "The paths will be difficult, but passable. We can continue our journeys today." One by one, the others rose and joined him at the window, looking out at the world the storm had created. Everything was white and pristine, untouched, beautiful in its stark simplicity. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks glowing faintly with the approaching dawn. "I will miss this," Sato said quietly. "This night, these stories, this feeling of connection. Tomorrow, I will be alone again, on the road, just an apprentice with a package to deliver. But tonight, I felt part of something larger." "You are part of something larger," Yuki said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We all are. Every person we meet, every story we hear, every kindness we show or receive, These create connections that ripple outward through the world. Tonight we were 6 strangers brought together by a storm. Now we are friends, bound by the stories we have shared. That connection will remain, even when we part." Takeshi nodded. "And we will carry these stories forward, share them with others we meet. That is how wisdom is preserved, passed down, kept alive. We become the storytellers for the next generation. Each of you has given me a gift tonight," Kenji said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been Ronin for 3 years, masterless, without purpose, simply wandering. But tonight, through your stories and your company, I have remembered what matters: honor, compassion, the possibility of change. I will carry these lessons with me." Otsuru had moved to the hearth and was beginning to prepare morning tea, her movements practiced and efficient. "Stay for breakfast," she said, though it was more a command than a request. "Before you go your separate ways, share one more meal together. Let the morning light find us still in fellowship." No one argued. They helped her prepare a simple but satisfying breakfast: rice, miso soup, pickled vegetables, dried fish. As they worked together in comfortable silence, the room gradually filled with light. The sun rose spectacular and golden, turning the snow outside into a field of diamonds. They sat in a circle once more, eating their breakfast, watching the sunrise through the window. It was perfect in its simplicity, this last shared meal, this quiet companionship. When they finished, Otsuru brought out tea, pouring for each of them with careful ceremony. They held the warm cups in their hands, and she raised hers slightly. "Ah, a toast," she said, "to the storm that brought us together, to the yokai who teach us wisdom, to the stories that keep our spirits alive, and to each of you, travelers and friends, who have made this old woman's night richer than any amount of gold could." They raised their cups in return and drank, and the tea was perfect, sweet and bitter, warm and sustaining, everything tea should be. As they prepared to leave, gathering their belongings, checking their traveling gear, there was a bitter sweetness to the activity. They were ready to continue their journeys, but reluctant to leave this place where they had found such unexpected connection. Hiroshi was the first to finish his preparations. He shouldered his pack, took up his walking staff, and bowed deeply to Otsuru. "Thank you, honored host, for your shelter, your food, your company, and your wisdom. This night will stay with me always." "Ah, and with me," Otsuru replied, returning his bow. "May your path be smooth, and may you find enlightenment at its end." One by one, the others prepared to depart. Yuki offered prayers for safe travel. Takeshi left a generous payment for their stay, far more than Otsuru asked for, insisting it was only fair. Kenji cleaned his corner meticulously, leaving no trace of his presence, the habit of a man used to moving on. And young Sato helped Otsuru carry water and wood, doing one last service before he left. They gathered at the door of the Crane's Rest, ready to step out into the cold morning. The paths had indeed been cleared enough by the wind that travel would be possible, though challenging. "Will we meet again?" Sato asked, looking at the others with hope in his young eyes. "Perhaps," Hiroshi said. The roads are long, and travelers often cross paths more than once. But even if we do not meet again in this life, we are connected now. The stories we shared create bonds that distance cannot break. Besides, Takeshi said, with a grin, you know where the crane's rest is. If you are ever on this road again, stop here. Otsuru will welcome you, and perhaps other travelers will be gathered by the fire, ready to share their own stories. Otsuru nodded. My door is always open to friends, and you are all friends now. Come back whenever your paths bring you this way. They stepped out into the morning, and the cold air was sharp and clean, filling their lungs, awakening them fully. The world sparkled with snow and sunlight, beautiful and promising. One by one, they set off on their separate paths, Hiroshi taking the road up toward the high temples, Yuki heading to her sister shrine deeper in the mountains, Takeshi descending toward the valley towns where he plied his trade, Kenji choosing a path that led north toward destinations only he knew, and young Sato continuing his journey to deliver his master's commission. Otsuru stood in the doorway of the Crane's Rest, watching them go, raising her hand in farewell to each. When they were all out of sight, she turned back into her inn, humming softly to herself. The main room seemed larger now, emptier, but not lonely. It held the warmth of the night that had passed, the echoes of stories and laughter and wisdom shared. She began to clean to prepare for the next travelers who would need shelter, and as she worked she thought about the stories that had been told. The yokai stories were not just entertainment, not just frightening tales to keep children in line. They were the accumulated wisdom of generations, dressed in supernatural garb to make them memorable, to make them powerful. They taught respect for nature, caution in the face of the unknown, compassion for all beings, the possibility of change and redemption. And they reminded people that the world was larger than they knew, that mystery and wonder still existed, that not everything could be explained or controlled or understood. In a way, the yokai kept humans humble, kept them aware that they were not the masters of all they surveyed, but simply one part of a vast, interconnected web of existence. Otsuru finished her cleaning and sat by the hearth, adding wood to rebuild the fire. Outside, the day was bright and clear. The storm completely passed. Inside, the inn was warm and ready for whoever might come next. She thought about the travelers, each heading toward their own destinations, carrying with them the stories they had heard. Hiroshi would share them with his fellow monks, adding them to the monastery's store of wisdom. Yuki would tell them to visitors at her shrine, helping people understand the spirits they honored. Takeshi would entertain fellow merchants on long roads, passing the tales along the trade routes. Kenji would carry them silently in his heart, letting them guide his choices as he wandered, and Sato would grow up remembering this night, would tell these stories to his own children and grandchildren someday. That was how wisdom survived, how culture was preserved, not in written texts alone, though those had their place, but in stories told by firelight, in companionship and shared experience, in the human need to connect, to teach, to pass on what mattered. The yokai would endure as long as people told their stories. The kitsune and tengu, the yuki-onna and kappa, the jorogumo and oni and tanuki and bakaneko, all of them living on in tales, teaching their lessons to each new generation. Otsuru smiled to herself and picked up her own cup of tea, sipping it slowly, savoring the warmth. Outside, the world turned on its axis, the sun climbing higher, the snow beginning its slow melt, the cycle continuing as it always had and always would. And in the mountains of Japan, in the spaces between the human and the wild, the yokai watched and waited, neither good nor evil, simply existing, reflecting back to humans their own fears and hopes, their own capacity for both destruction and creation, their own potential for transformation. The stories were true in the way that mattered most. Not factually true, perhaps, though Otsuru believed some of them were, but emotionally true, spiritually true. They contained truths about human nature, about the world, about how to live with wisdom and compassion. And as long as there were travelers seeking shelter from storms, as long as there were hearth fires and warm tea and the human need for connection, these stories would continue to be told. The yokai would live on, teaching their lessons, bridging the gap between the known and the unknown, reminding humans that the world was stranger and more wonderful than they dared to imagine. Otsuru set down her teacup and looked around her beloved inn, the Crane's Rest, which had hosted so many travelers, heard so many stories, provided shelter from so many storms. It would continue to do so as long as she had strength, and after she was gone, perhaps another would take her place, continuing the tradition. The cycle would continue. Travelers would come, stories would be told, wisdom would be passed on, and the yokai, those spirits of the margins and the wild places, would remain, neither forgotten nor fully understood, but always present, always teaching, always reminding humans of the magic that still existed in the world. The sun rose higher, the morning advanced, and Otsuru sat peacefully by her fire, content in the knowledge that she had served her purpose, that she had provided not just shelter and food, but also the space for stories to be shared, for wisdom to be passed on, for connections to be made. That was enough. That was everything. And that, my dear adventurers, is where we will end tonight's story. The storm has passed, the travelers have departed, but the stories remain, as they always do. May you carry their wisdom with you. May you remember that the world is stranger and more wonderful than we know. And may you always find shelter when the storms of life come upon you. Until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.